Chapter 5168. Haha, you're quite thoughtful, kid. You're starting to sound like a boss now. Lin Dongfang gave a rare nod of praise before continuing. But speaking of which, this demi-spirit state you've been using lately is really useful, being able to send the 5 elements murderous energy into their bodies without anyone noticing. It's not easy at all. Just as Lin Dongfang said, the reason why Ling Shan and the others were able to break through in this short half a month wasn't entirely because of their own hard work. It was mainly because of Lin Yi's secret guidance. Otherwise, even if some of them had succeeded, it'd only be a small portion, and it wouldn't have been like this. After all, breaking through is an extremely difficult thing, and unless Lin Yi directly helped them increase their strength like before, they couldn't afford to be distracted at all during the process, let alone be disturbed or affected in the slightest. As a result, even if he knew that they were all one step away, Lin Yi couldn't help them even if he wanted to. Even if he had a thorough understanding of the entire process, even if he had already thought of a way to use the murderous energy to guide them through the last step, he still couldn't do anything about it. Once Lin Yi got close, everyone would be affected, and they'd lose that desperate state of breakthrough. It wouldn't be a matter of one step, and it wouldn't matter how much help Lin Yi gave them then. Fortunately, after this period of trial and error, Lin Yi could already familiarize himself with the demi-spirit state. This state had many uses. Not only could he avoid physical attacks like he did with Bing Wuqing, but there was also an unexpected benefit. He could freely control qi from afar. This was completely different from controlling the 5 elements killing qi after attacking in the past. Remote control of the 5 elements killing qi after attacking could at most be regarded as a kind of rough control, but it was absolutely impossible to rely on this to guide everyone to Foundation establishment. This process had to be extremely precise, and even if Lin Yi put his hand on them, he might not be able to do it, much less control it from afar. However, the demi-spirit state he'd grasped made the impossible possible. This was because in this state, as long as it was within the range of his soul, he could freely control the killing intent of the 5 elements as if it was in his body. In particular, in this state, the senses of his soul were much more sensitive than usual. Using it to guide everyone through the final step was no longer a fantasy, but a reality. This is the result of months of hard work. If I can't even do something as simple as this, I'd cry myself to death. Lin Yi smiled faintly at the clueless crowd. Keep showing off. Lin Dongfang rolled his eyes. He'd seen everything from the beginning to the end and knew that it was a pleasant surprise. This Lin Yi was getting thicker and thicker, and he didn't even blush when he was bragging. Lin Yi couldn't help but smile and said with some relief, "Fortunately, everyone reached Foundation building in time, or we wouldn't be able to make it to the next trial." Xi and Yijia had already told him about the trial, and he intended to bring everyone to the Archean trials for a share of the loot. Naturally, he'd let everyone participate in the trial. Although the trial itself had no threshold, and even those with the strength of Heaven Stage could participate, they would be the weakest. Not only would they not be able to achieve a satisfactory ranking, they might not even be able to guarantee their own safety, and that would not be worth it. But then again, even if everyone succeeded in reaching Foundation building, compared to the disciples of the Archean Alliance, their strength was almost at the bottom, and the situation was still not optimistic. Fortunately, they'd made up for the difference in quality, and there was a glimmer of hope. "Have you really decided?" Lin Dongfang asked. "Yes." Lin Yi nodded and said seriously, "After you told me those things, I always have a lingering sense of urgency. Not only do I have to improve my strength, but the people around me also have to think of ways to improve their strength. This time, the Archean Trials is a very rare opportunity, and I don't want them to miss it." Before this, Lin Yi's attitude towards everyone participating in the Archean Trials was still ambiguous, but now it was different. After knowing that the center of the trial was a powerful and omnipresent threat, if he didn't quickly improve everyone's strength, he wouldn't feel safe. If that's the case, then you have to put in some effort in this trial, or else if they only rely on themselves, it'll be difficult. Lin Dongfang raised his eyebrows. "Yes, but if the thing I want can be delivered in time, it can save a lot of trouble." Lin Yi smiled and looked up and down Lin Dongfang. Don't waste your time. You can solve this trivial matter yourself. Don't always think of grabbing this old man's able-bodied men. In a few days, I still have to go back to the West Star Mountain Village. Lin Dongfeng quickly said. How do you know I want to grab able-bodied men? You guessed it pretty accurately. Linny said, surprised. Nonsense. As soon as you stick out your ass, I know what shit you're going to shit. Do I still need to guess? Lin Dongfeng snorted. On Heaven Stage Island, Tian Chan and the others finally received Lin Yi's reply. When they learned that Lin Yi was safe and sound, they couldn't help but be overjoyed. They could finally relax after a few months. As for the matter that Lin Yi asked them to do in the letter, Wei Shinjin immediately went to do it. He was very familiar with the Middle Island, and it was the same for the black market. As long as there was enough spiritual jades, there was nothing that couldn't be bought. Sure enough, in just half a day, Wei Shinjin got 21 entry-level mental cultivation methods of each sect. After 3 days, the number had increased to as many as 32. Although it was still far from the number of sects on Heaven Stage Island, it was already quite a considerable number. These 32 entry-level mental cultivation methods were mainly from the sects on Middle Island and North Island. As for the other Heaven Stage Islands, they weren't included. South Island was the territory of the Spirit Beast clan, and there was no such thing as cultivating mental cultivation methods. West Island was an iron plate, and it was far from Middle Island. Naturally, the entry-level mental cultivation methods wouldn't wander into the black market of Middle Island. As for East Continent, it was needless to say that ordinary people couldn't get it at all. Even if they got it, they wouldn't have the guts to sell it in the black market. After all, the deterrent power of East Continent was not to be taken lightly. Chapter 5169. Although he could still gain something if he continued, it would definitely drag on for a long time, and the harvest would certainly not be too big. Therefore, after Wei Shinjin summarized these cultivation methods, he handed them over to Tian Chan and then asked Okuda to send the letter out. Okuda did not feel that this was troublesome at all. Instead, he was very happy. If something really happened to Lin Yi in the secular world, he might come and help him. But since Lin Yi was safe and sound, he was still a potential stock worth trying to make friends with. This kind of small matter was naturally not a problem. If he could sell a favor with a casual greeting, he would be more than happy to do so. It had to be said that Okuda's face was really useful. The last time the center was willing to send a letter was already an exception. Now, with a casual greeting from him, Wan Xiaoru did not hesitate to give him the green light. But after seeing the thick stack of letters, he couldn't help but be surprised. When he opened them, he saw a variety of entry-level cultivation methods. Why did he get so much garbage? Wan Xiaoru casually muttered. These entry-level mental cultivation methods of various sects were worthless in her eyes. Even on the Heaven Stage Island, they were just common goods. Naturally, she would not take them seriously. She immediately sent someone to the secular world. After these things were sent to the secular world, Lan Xiaoru and the glasses doctor also muttered the same thing. However, without the permission of the main body, Wan Xiaoru, they did not dare to privately open Lin Yi's things. It was just that anyone who saw this thick stack of things would be curious. Those who did not know would think that they were recycling old newspapers. In any case, this collection of cultivation methods of the sects on Heaven Step Island was finally sent to Lin Yi. After skimming through it, Lin Yi could not help but be overjoyed. These things were just common goods on Heaven Step Island, but in his hands, especially at this critical moment when the Archaic Alliance appeared, it was priceless. Especially now, this summary of mental cultivation methods not only had long-term value, it also had the practical value of putting out a fire. Lin Yi gathered Lingshan and the others and asked Auntie Qing to make their specialties. The group chatted and laughed around the table, and the atmosphere was very harmonious. Ziyu spoke up first. Lin Yi bro, let's just set a rule. We'll meet every 3 days from now on. Look, we just had a campfire party 2 days ago, and now we can eat Auntie Qing's specialties.
How nice is that?
Yes, that's how it should be. Everyone agreed with a smile. Sure, as long as you're happy. Besides, everyone has been working hard during this period. We should relax a little. Lin Yi immediately agreed. Although he had been reunited with everyone for a few months, it was rare for them to have a proper and relaxed gathering like this. At first, they had to deal with the troublemaking disciples of the Archaic Alliance. Then, they had to talk to Xianijia. After that, they came to this transit island. Although they had settled down, it was a pity that everyone was either busy building the Seaview Villa or cultivating nonstop. It wasn't just Lingshan and Qintian who were extremely responsible, but even Ziyu and the others, who didn't have much of an interest in training, acted very conscientiously here. After all, they were surrounded by Archaic Alliance disciples, and this wasn't just a simple pressure. It was more of a sense of urgency. They didn't want to drag Lin Yi down, especially when they'd been in seclusion for the past few months. They hadn't had a chance to gather with Lin Yi since the beginning, let alone relax like this. That's great. Ziyu jumped up in excitement and said something that made Lin Yi and the others smile. Why do I feel like I'm done with the exam? It's so relaxing. We've finally reached foundation after so long of closed-door training, but it's just a test. Everyone laughed. It was rare that they all succeeded, and it felt like the high school entrance exams. There were no test papers or textbooks, or they'd burn them all to celebrate. Well said, but your exam isn't over yet. Breaking through to foundation only means that you've gotten a pass. The real highlight is next, Lin Yi said, pouring cold water on them. Boss, you're talking about the test? Qintian couldn't help but ask. He was the first one to come out of seclusion, and the competition had become a common topic among almost all the Archaic Alliance disciples. You could hear about it just by walking around. It was impossible not to know.
You can say that.
Lin Yi nodded. He wanted to say that it was the Archaic Trials, but calling it the test wasn't wrong. If they couldn't even pass the test, then there was no point in talking about the Archaic Trials. We're participating as well? Lingshan paused, and the others were curious as well. They'd been training on their own ever since they came to the Transfer Islands, and they didn't have anything to do with the Archaic Alliance. According to what Lin Yi said, this place was their future base, and they didn't think they'd need to interact with the Archaic Alliance. That's right. According to what I know, only those who obtain a certain ranking in the trials will have the qualifications to participate in the trials of the Archaic era. This is an extremely rare opportunity, and I hope that everyone will be able to participate. Archaic trials? Everyone looked at each other when they heard this. They were completely unprepared for this, but they had always followed Lin Yi's orders. Since Lin Yi had already said so, they wouldn't have any objections. After digesting it for a while, they all nodded in agreement. That's great. They're just going to travel overseas at most, but we're going to travel outside the world. It's so much better. Ziyu was very excited. The group couldn't help but smile. Lin Yi smiled. Sure, then you might as well write a travel book about the Archaic Jianghu. I guarantee you'll be the only one in the world. Sure, but if we really go to the Archaic Jianghu, will we be able to come back? Ziyu asked the question that was on everyone's mind. The Archaic Alliance's test happened once every 1,000 years, and even if they could live that long, the entire world might be gone after 1,000 years, let alone their friends and family. Chapter 50, 170. Then there's no problem. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief in unison. Even though they wanted to improve their strength as soon as possible, it wasn't too realistic for them to really give up everything in the mortal world for this. It couldn't be any better if they were able to freely travel between the primeval underworld and the mortal world. The competition isn't far away. Relax is relax, but we still need to familiarize ourselves with the foundational level. Don't ask for too much, just get used to it. Understand? Lin Yi said. Boss, even if we get used to it, we're still just the weakest early phase of foundational. It's not going to be a good idea to participate in the competition with this level of strength, right? Yu Bing frowned. Everyone followed Lin Yi and had high spirits, but thinking that their opponents in the competition were all from the Archaic Alliance, they couldn't help but feel nervous. After all, they were on a completely different level. It's a bit difficult, but I got this from Tian Chan on Sky Class Island.
It'll come in handy.
Lin Yi smiled faintly. What is it? Everyone took the thick stack of papers from Lin Yi's hands and passed them around, A compilation of all the entry-level arts on Sky Class Island? That's right. I asked Tian-chan to get this. With this, you'll have a better chance in the competition. Lin nodded. How do we use these? Could it be that they want us to cultivate these mental cultivation methods? We don't have enough time, do we? Everyone was still confused. Although there was a chance to change the cultivation method after reaching the foundation establishment stage, it wasn't something that could be done overnight. No matter how good one's aptitude was, it would be difficult to have any effect without a few months of practice. Those with average aptitude would need a few years of painstaking practice before they could have a small success. What was the use of these few days? Don't get the wrong idea. I'm not telling you to practice these arts. It's just for the competition. As for how to do it, I'll explain it to you after I finish studying it. Lin shook his head with a smile. If he really wanted to find a practitioner's art for everyone, he wouldn't be looking for these common beginner's arts. He had to find a more advanced one that was suitable for everyone's characteristics. They didn't understand what Lin meant, but since he wanted to keep them in suspense, they could only wait. They were the ones participating in the competition, and Lin would give them some advice sooner or later. Right, big bro Lin, how many people did you find on Sky Class Island these years? You haven't told us about them yet.
Ziyu asked.
Everyone perked up their ears. Lin did tell them about his experiences on Sky Class Island, but it wasn't practical to tell them everything one by one. He could only tell them what he knew, and they were curious about Ziyu's question as well. About that, let me count. Lin sighed and counted with his fingers. Tian-chan, Sydney, Han Jingjing, Wang Xinyan. There's only 4 of them now. Other than that, there's Zhong Pingliang and Xiao Ran. Zhong Pingliang betrayed us before, and Xiao Ran only got close to us after coming to Sky Class Island. Then what about Chunxi? Ziyu asked eagerly. I'm not sure. Lin sighed. Chunxi had gone with Tian-chan and Tian-dai, but he'd only found Tian-chan alone on the middle island, not Chunxi and Tian-dai. It wasn't hard to guess that Chunxi and Tian-dai were separated during the teleportation, so even Tian-chan didn't know where the 2 girls were. Otherwise, Tian-chan would have mentioned it before Lin even asked. Ziyu couldn't help but feel disappointed. Will something happen to her? I don't think so. Sky Class Island is huge, and it's normal that we can't find them now. But I'll find them sooner or later. Lin patted Ziyu's shoulder and comforted her. On the other side, Lingshan wanted to say something as well. Lin knew that she was worried about her sister, Songling Rui, and could only give her a comforting look. Although he was comforting everyone, Lin was actually more worried than Ziyu and the others. He was just forcing himself to be calm in front of everyone. After all, this was different from when he first went to Sky Class Island. At that time, he didn't know much about Sky Class Island, and he thought that the other islands would be as peaceful and stable as the North. As long as he had the chance to go out, he'd be able to reunite with these people. But now, he was all over the East, West, South, and Center Islands, and most of them were still missing. Lin didn't care about those people who had nothing to do with him. He didn't care if they were dead or alive, but Qinshi, Tiandai, Bingtang, and Songling Rui were people he had to find no matter what. He couldn't be at ease as long as he didn't hear from them. With that thought, Lin Yi's excitement died down. He was speechless. Even with his current strength and connections, he still couldn't find the whereabouts of these people. He didn't even dare to think about what this meant. He could only run away subconsciously. At the very least, he was sure that the North, Middle, and West Islands didn't have these people. Otherwise, Lin Yi would have found out already. The reason was simple. Even if they were sent to different sky-tier islands during the teleportation process, the practitioners of each island would gather together at the beginning. Tian-chan and Xueli were at the Middle Island, Han Jingjing was at the West Island, and Lin Yi was at the North Island. If Chun Shi and the others were also sent to these 3 islands, they should be able to meet each other. However, another possibility couldn't be completely ruled out, and that was there might not be only one transmission point on the same island. As far as Lin Yi knew, there was only one transmission point on the North Island, but it might not be the same for the Middle and West Islands. He hadn't investigated it carefully, let alone the South and East Islands. However, even if this was the case, Lin Yi was still sure that these people didn't exist in the North, Middle, and West Islands. After all, he had a good relationship with the high-level leaders of these three islands. The deputy island owner of the North Island, Shanghai Tianhua, was his half-master, and the island owner of the West Island, Ning Shengling, was his future mother-in-law. The acting island owner of the Middle Island, Okuda, was also deliberately trying to make friends with him. Chapter 51-71. As for the eastern and southern continents, Lin Yi had been there before, and he had some connections there, but his influence in those two places paled in comparison to the other three. The only place he'd been to in the eastern continent was the Golden-class ocean, and that was only in Skycloud, Morning Star, and Thunder Plains. He didn't know much about it, not to mention the legendary Mystic-class ocean. There were even higher levels of oceans. Lin Yi doubted that any new person from the common world would be able to survive after being teleported there. Xinyan was lucky to have met the Eastern Sea's divine nun, but if she wasn't, then it'd be hard to say. Lin Yi couldn't help but think of that girl from the common world that Yao Jili had tortured. She might be one of them. If being teleported to the East continent was considered a bad draw, being teleported to the South continent would be the worst draw with a slim chance of survival. The South continent sea area alone was already chaotic and dangerous, especially if they were teleported to the inland of the South Island, which was the territory of the Spirit Beast clan, which was known as the Forbidden Area for humans. Once they were teleported there, they would not survive and would definitely be killed immediately. Eastern continent, Southern continent. No matter where they were teleported to, it wouldn't be good news. But if they weren't teleported to these two places, then the news would be even worse. If they were teleported to the North, Middle, and West Islands, and there was no news from them, then there was only one worst-case scenario. They'd all met with misfortune. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat at the thought. People were like that. Once they were down, it was easy for them to get stuck in a dead end, unable to pull themselves out. The more they thought about it, the more wrong they'd get. And in the end, they'd really be stuck in a dead end. Lin Yi, are you alright? Lingshan and the others looked at each other, worried at Lin Yi's face. Lin Yi had always been so confident and optimistic in front of them. What was going on? Oh, I'm fine. Just a little distracted. Lin Yi smiled dryly. Really? The others were still worried. It's true. Lin Yi nodded. He didn't dare to tell everyone the truth. After all, everything was just speculation before he got the exact information. He didn't want everyone to worry for nothing. After this incident, everyone's mood was more or less dampened. The originally joyous gathering had to come to an abrupt end, and Lingshan and the others dispersed to rest. Lin Yi, however, was stopped by Dongfang. You want to slip away after eating? Do you think this is a restaurant? Go and wash the dishes. Lin Dongfang curled his lips in annoyance. Lin Yi glanced at the table full of empty plates and suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just now, everyone was frowning, but their mouths weren't idle at all. They licked the plates quite clean. What are you waiting for? Wash the dishes. Dongfang was still rushing him, but he suddenly said, There's nothing to worry about, they won't die yet. The words came out of nowhere, but Lin Yi understood immediately that the old man was comforting him. He smiled bitterly. I'll accept your words of comfort, but I know what I'm doing. It doesn't look too good.
Know what?
What do you know? Dongfang laughed. I haven't found any news of them yet, but I've been on Sky-class Island for 3 years, and I've made a name for myself. Even if I haven't confirmed some things, I can still make deductions. Lin Yi sighed. He had to force a smile in front of Lingshan and the others, but there was no need for it in front of old Lin. That's a deduction, and mine is a divination. Which one do you think is more accurate? Dongfang said with interest. Divination? What divination? Lin Yi blinked. You don't even know about divination? You're pretty ignorant. Dongfang said disdainfully. Wait, isn't divination a superstition? How can you believe in something like that? Lin Yi couldn't help but be surprised. Who told you that divination is a superstition? You're calling something you don't know superstition? You're not at a low level anymore, can you not be so childish? Dongfang curled his lips and explained, "Listen up, divination is a very mysterious ancient art. It's hard to say that it's 100% accurate every time, but if it's done by a master, then it's very trustworthy." Ancient art? That's real? Lin Yi's face was full of shock. Something as mysterious as divination was like the talk of ghosts and gods in the eyes of normal people. Even he had always thought that it was just a trick to fool old men and old women. He didn't think that Lin Dongfang would actually say that there was such a thing. Remember, don't jump to conclusions about things that you haven't seen with your own eyes. I can tell you very clearly that divination does exist. However, the number of experts who have truly mastered this ancient secret technique can be counted on one hand, Lin Dongfang said with a serious expression. Yes, I'll remember that. Lin Yi nodded solemnly. But what does this have to do with Qin Shi and the others? You're saying that a master has divined their fates? That's right. From the results of the divination, their lives aren't in danger yet, so you don't have to worry. Dongfang nodded. That's good. That's good. Lin Yi finally let out a breath of relief, but he was still curious. Speaking of which, where did you find this fortune teller, sir? Why don't you introduce me to him and let me broaden my horizons? You? It's about luck to meet such a master. The luck hasn't come yet. Just wait. Lin Dongfang said insincerely. In fact, Lin Yi had already met him before. Lin Yi had already believed it, but now he was starting to wonder again. What opportunity? You didn't make this up to tease me, did you? It's up to you to believe it or not. Lin Dongfang rolled his eyes at him and urged, "Hurry up and wash the dishes. Don't be so slow. Are you dawdling?" Before he finished, Aunt Qing suddenly shouted, "Don't even think about being lazy. We'll wash the dishes together." Aunt Qing is wise. Lin Yi hurriedly flattered the old man, amused by the look of resentment on old Lin's face. Everything had its counter after all. 5 days passed in a flash. On this day, Xian Ijie deliberately suspended the seabed mining and gathered all the disciples of the Archaic Alliance, including the apprentices. Except for Lin Dongfang and Aunt Qing, who went back to the West Star Mountain Village to drink water, Lin Yi and the others also attended. Chapter 5172. Everyone had expected this. They were all excited and rubbed their palms together, eager to give it a try. The trial competition is an old tradition of the Archaic Alliance. I'm sure everyone is familiar with it. However, it's the first time for some of the disciples, so I'll have to explain to everyone what the trial competition is. Xian Ijie smiled and continued, "The trial competition, as the name suggests, is a preparation for the primordial trial. The purpose of this competition is to see if everyone's strength is qualified to participate in the primordial trial. This is also for everyone's safety. After all, the primordial trial is very dangerous. If you're not strong enough, you might die in vain." Martial Uncle Xian, may I know how to be considered strong enough? Could it be that there's a realm of strength? Only those who are above this realm are qualified, and those who are below this realm are not qualified to participate in the archaic trials? Someone asked impatiently. That's not the case. Even though it's simple and clear, it doesn't conform to the objective of our primeval trials. Everyone must remember that the primeval trials isn't a simple trial. It only exists for a single purpose, and that is to allow those disciples with true strength to distinguish themselves and become the important foster targets of the various primeval sects and clans. Xian Ijie paused and added, "Of course, the strength I'm talking about doesn't just refer to the realm. More importantly, it's also about the potential. You should know that a genius with outstanding potential, even if he's only in the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm, is definitely not any less valuable than a Foundation establishment realm expert in the perfected Foundation establishment realm." Then how do we determine the potential and talent? Do we look at the spiritual root? Everyone asked. The spiritual root is only one aspect. It's too narrow to only look at the spiritual root. After all, there are many so-called geniuses with outstanding spiritual roots, but eventually become mediocre. Therefore, the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance have unanimously decided that only the disciples with outstanding performance in actual combat are the real geniuses that are worth cultivating. Exion Egia said seriously. Actual combat? How does that work? Everyone didn't understand what was going on. Although there would always be a grand refinement competition before every primordial refinement competition, the content of every grand refinement competition would be different. In the early days, there was a time where everything was cut off, but in the recent times, there were all sorts of mutual competitions. There were internal competitions between various sects, and there were also group competitions between sections. There were all sorts of forms, and every time it would be different. Improvisation is also an ability that must be tested. Forgive me for keeping you in suspense for the specific content of the contest. The contest will officially begin 3 days later. I'll explain it to you in detail then. You just need to go back and get yourself ready, said Exion Egia with a smile. The people wanted to ask more, but Exion Egia was the leader of the team after all, and he was a Golden Core stage expert. Since he had said so, they dared not ask further. However, Xue Jianfeng did not have such concerns. He was also a Golden Core stage expert now, so he did not take Exion Egia seriously. He immediately said in a sarcastic tone, "Uncle Exion, what you said sounds nice, but who knows if you will secretly reveal it to your own people in advance? I'm afraid it's not fair to everyone, right?" The people were already muttering in their hearts. After being incited by him, their expressions suddenly changed. Everything else was fine, but they were worried about the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island. Exion Egia had always had a good image, but no one would believe that he was fair and selfless, without any selfishness. At least, the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island would leak some information in advance. It did not seem to be a big deal, but one was well prepared, while the other was caught off guard. When it came to the real trial competition, their performance was very different. Even if it was just their wishful thinking, the slightest bit of unfairness would be magnified infinitely in this kind of competition and examination. Everyone would feel that they would be the victim, and eventually the crowd would be so agitated that it would get out of hand. Xue Jianfeng, are you suspecting that I'm unfair? Exion Egia's face darkened, and he snorted coldly. No, I dare not. But I think it's better to be open and transparent about things like the trial competition so that people won't talk behind my back and suspect me. I'm doing this for your own good, Uncle Exion. What do you guys think? Xue Jianfeng said carelessly. Yes, Senior Brother Xue is right. The crowd agreed in unison. The crowd was so agitated that Exion Egia did not dare to suppress it by force. He snorted with a gloomy face and said, Very well, you're right. But it's a pity that I still can't tell you the content of the competition, because even I don't know it yet. So far, I've only set a general tone. As for the specific competition items, the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance are still discussing it. The competition items will be sent here on time in 3 days, and we'll know then. The crowd immediately looked at each other. Since even the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance were still discussing it, there was nothing to doubt. Do you have any more questions? It's better to raise them all at once, so that some people won't gossip behind your back again. Exion Egia looked at Xue Jianfeng and said. Xue Jianfeng had repeatedly contradicted him, the leading martial uncle. Even if he had a mild temperament, it was impossible for him to swallow his anger. His stance showed that he was going against Xue Jianfeng. If it was someone else, they would have backed off long ago. However, Xue Jianfeng did not put Exion Egia in his eyes at all. After all, he had too many things to rely on. Not to mention that he was an early-stage Gold Core expert. He had the support of the deputy head of the Snow Sword faction for his father. Most importantly, he had the support of this huge and mysterious organization. With his usual arrogance, it would be strange if he still respected Exion Egia. I have another question. Does everyone in the Transit Islands have to participate in this trial competition? Xue Jianfeng opened his mouth and asked, but his eyes were on Lin Yi and the others. He did not know that Lin Yi had already made up his mind to let everyone participate in the trial competition. He was afraid that they would not take the bait. Not necessarily. The archaic trials have never forced anyone to participate. The same goes for the trial competition. It's up to the individual whether they want to participate or not. However, if they give up the trial competition, it's equivalent to giving up the opportunity to participate in the archaic trials, Enchanting said indifferently. The answer was not surprising, but it made Shui Jianfeng's face a little pale. The plan that he proposed to the bespectacled doctor had the most basic premise, which was that Lin Yi and the others had to participate in the trial competition. Otherwise, he would be helpless. However, this was different from the mining at the bottom of the sea. After all, to the people present, participating in the trial competition was not an unacceptable obligation. Instead, it was a privilege that most people yearned for from the bottom of their hearts. Chapter 5173. After thinking about it, Shui Jianfeng had no choice but to say, "The primordial trial this time is a rare event that happens once in 1,000 years. I've long heard about how good it is, but I don't know if the rumors are true or not. Why don't you take this opportunity to tell us about it, Uncle Master, Enchanting?" Enchanting frowned and looked at Shui Jianfeng strangely. What is this guy talking about? What is he trying to do? Seeing Enchanting's indifferent expression, Shui Jianfeng couldn't help but secretly spit. However, he had no other way to lure Lin Yi and the others. Since he couldn't threaten them, he could only tempt them with benefits. He quickly coughed and winked at Bing Wuqing. With Bing Wuqing's character, of course, she wouldn't do such a boring thing with him. However, she remembered that the bespectacled doctor had told her that Shui Jianfeng would be in charge of everything related to the trial competition. Therefore, even he couldn't be too disrespectful, or he would be suspected. Elder Enchanting, I don't know much about this, and I believe everyone is the same. Why don't we satisfy everyone's curiosity? Bing Wuqing could only bite the bullet and play along. That's right. Since the trial competition is a preparation for the primordial trial, it's reasonable to explain the uniqueness of the primordial trial in advance. At least everyone will have an idea. Uncle Master Enchanting, you're the Uncle Master leading the team. This is also your responsibility, isn't it? Shui Jianfeng hurriedly rephrased his words again. That's right, Martial Uncle Enchanting. Please tell us about it. The others were also mobilized. At this point, Enchanting had no choice but to say it. Moreover, it wasn't a secret, so it was not a bad idea to satisfy everyone's curiosity. Alright, but this trial ground only happens once in 1,000 years. I only have a rough idea, and it's not accurate. Just take it as a reference for everyone. Enchanting pondered for a while, then said, any place that can be chosen as a trial ground will definitely have treasures of heaven and earth. This trial ground will definitely have more treasures than other places. However, at the same time, the number of guardian beasts and various dangerous factors will also increase. Everyone should be mentally prepared for this. Everyone nodded and hurriedly asked, what are the special benefits of this trial ground? Martial Uncle Enchanting, please tell us in detail. As far as I know, the most eye-catching place in this trial ground is a river called the River of Divine Sense. As the name suggests, you can refine your divine sense by staying in it. I believe I don't need to explain the benefits, said Enchanting. River of Divine Knowledge. Everyone's eyes brightened. The Archaic Alliance had always attached great importance to the cultivation of divine sense, and there were very few places that could temper divine sense in the entire ancient Jianghu. Moreover, all of them were in the hands of the 4 great sects and clans. Aside from their core disciples, no one else could get close. They didn't expect that there would be a divine sense river in this trial ground. It was truly worthy of being a once-in-1,000 years opportunity. Not only the crowd, but even Lin Yi couldn't help but feel refreshed. He didn't pay much attention to the cultivation of divine sense in the past, but his mentality was completely different now. It was not only because he was now a primordial spirit, but more importantly, he was increasingly aware of the importance of the cultivation of divine sense. If one's physical strength was the hardware, then the cultivation of the primordial spirit was the software. The two complemented each other and couldn't be dispensed with. It didn't matter when his realm was still low, but when he reached his current realm, he was about to break through to the magnate realm. If the cultivation of the primordial spirit was still so weak, It would be like losing one of his two legs. How could he walk? When his primordial spirit was projected back to the secular world, it was already a rare surprise for Lin Yi to get the star-ink charcoal from Lung Lung. He didn't expect that there would be a divine sense river in the ancient trial ground. It was a great opportunity. Previously, he only wanted to explore the ancient Jianghu. Now that he heard Xianji's words, he suddenly felt excited. Not only that, legend has it that the river of divine sense can not only refine divine sense, but there are also unparalleled treasures buried in the river. Xianji sighed. Treasures? What treasures? Everyone's curiosity was piqued. I don't know about this. If you're interested, you can try it yourself when you get there. Xianji smiled faintly.
Great.
Since the legend is so magical, it must be a peerless treasure. By then, we'll use our own skills to get it. Shui Jianfeng took the opportunity to instigate. Senior brother Shui, you're right. Everyone agreed in unison. Xianji smiled without saying a word. Although he didn't know what treasures it was, since the legend was passed down after 1,000 years, it was obvious that the treasures must be extraordinary. How could a random disciple in the foundation building stage possess it? Putting aside whether these people had the opportunity and luck, even if they did encounter it, it was hard to tell whether it would be a blessing or a curse. They might even lose their lives. They really didn't know their limits. However, as the junior uncle leading the team, it was not appropriate for him to say these words. Anyway, everyone was just fantasizing. It was not worthwhile to dampen their enthusiasm for such a small matter. While everyone was feeling excited, Shui Jianfeng had been observing the reactions of Lin Yi and the others. In contrast, he was much colder, especially Lin Yi, who did not say a word. He did not seem to be moved at all. Shui Jianfeng muttered to himself, "He's still not taking the bait. This guy is quite calm." Therefore, he thought about it and said deliberately, "Since there are so many benefits in the Archean trials, naturally, only the disciples of the Archean Alliance can participate. Those unrelated people in the secular world don't have this qualification, right?" This. Xianji looked at Lin Yi awkwardly. He did not know what Lin Yi meant, so it was not appropriate for him to respond in public. Lin Yi was speechless. Shui Jianfeng's little trick was too obvious and low-level. However, since he had already decided to bring everyone to participate in the Archean trials, he could only go along with him and said, "So, what you're saying is that we can't participate." That's not necessarily true. However, Junior Uncle Xian just said that if anyone doesn't participate in the trials, it means that they have given up on the Archean trials. I don't care about anything else, but I'm afraid that some people will enter through the back door. Shui Jianfeng sneered. As soon as he said this, everyone looked at Lin Yi and the others with suspicious eyes. They could not even tolerate a little bit of unfairness, let alone Lin Yi and the others entering through the back door. Chapter 5174. Lin Yi was waiting for Shui Jianfeng to say that. He smiled. "All right, it's just a test. We'll participate." That's more like it. Only then did Shui Jianfeng smile in satisfaction. The rest didn't matter. To him, as long as Lin Yi and the others could participate in the competition, his plan would be halfway to success. "All right, we've said what we need to say. Go back and prepare yourselves," Xianji announced. Everyone dispersed to rest and prepare for the competition in 3 days. Lin Yi, on the other hand, gathered Lingshan and the others together. There's only 3 days left, but as the saying goes, sharpening a spear at the last minute isn't the fastest, but it'll still help. Otherwise, the competition won't be easy to fool. "Boss, it's only 3 days, isn't it too late?" Chen Tian smiled bitterly. "It's not late, not at all." Lin Yi smiled and said to everyone, "As long as you remember what I'm about to teach you, I don't know if it'll be useful for anything else, but it should be useful for the upcoming competition." "What is it? 3 days?" the group asked curiously. "Haha, it's nothing profound. Do you still remember the summary of the practitioner's arts I received a few days ago?" Lin Yi smiled. "Yes, but those are the arts of the sex on Sky Class Island, right? What's the use?" Lingshan asked curiously. Judging from the North Island's Blue Cloud sect and other clues, Sky Class Island and the immemorial Small Jianghu are inextricably linked. The same sects in these two places practice basically the same mental cultivation. So, although this is a summary of the mental cultivation of the sects in Sky Class Island, it can also be said to be a summary of the mental cultivation of the immemorial sections. Lin Yi explained. The group nodded, but they were still confused. What does that have to do with the test? It's simple. Since we have the arts of the sects, we can use it to figure out the fighting style of the disciples and grasp their strengths and weaknesses. From there, we can come up with the most effective strategy. I've also created some counter moves while studying the manuals, Lin Yi said. Counter moves. The group's eyes lit up. That's right, there aren't many. Each sect only has 2 or 3 moves, and they're not complicated, simple, and practical. If you guys can learn these moves in 3 days, the benefits will be obvious. Lin Yi nodded. Fuck. Boss, you're not just making us cram at the last minute, you're bringing a cheat sheet with you. If we learn all of this, we'll be able to beat the disciples of the ancient sects in the test. Chen Tian said happily. That's not necessarily the case. In order for the counter moves I've taught you to be effective, you need to have a certain level of strength. If the opponent's strength is too much higher than yours, then it won't be effective. But if that's the case, there's no point thinking about it. It's better to just surrender. Lin Yi smiled and said, All right, time's running out. Let's start.
Right.
Everyone replied in unison. 3 days later, everyone on the transit islands gathered again, including Xianijia. Everyone was staring at the teleportation formation eagerly. Finally, a white light flashed and a scroll appeared in the portal. Xianijia opened it immediately, and the rules of the test were written on it. Xianijia looked through the entire document and nodded while stroking his beard. He then announced, Everyone listen carefully. What I'm about to say is the rules of this trial. If you miss a word, it'll be your loss. Yes, the group listened attentively. First, the test will be divided into 8 teams. Those below Foundation Establishment will be in 1 team. Early Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Early Stage Foundation Establishment, Mid-Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Mid-Stage Foundation Establishment, Late Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Late Stage Foundation Establishment, and Perfect Stage Foundation Establishment will be in their own team. Everyone please take your seats. Now please get into your teams, Xianijia ordered, and the group began to line up according to their strength. At this moment, no one would play any tricks. Firstly, they did not know the intention of such a team. Secondly, there were no secrets between the brothers in the sect. They knew each other's strength and realm clearly. Moreover, Xianijia, a gold core stage master, was watching them. It was impossible to fool them even if they wanted to. Lin Yi gave the group a look, and Lingshan and the others nodded, walking into the group of early phase foundations. This caused quite a commotion. A lot of people didn't realize that they'd all succeeded, thinking that they were still Sky Class full mastery. But they were just surprised for a moment, not really taking Lingshan and the others seriously. After all, even if they succeeded in their foundation establishment, they were just the weakest early stage. They posed no threat to Archaic Alliance disciples, so naturally, they didn't have to worry about them. As for Lin Yi himself, while he was the elder master of the Green Cloud sect, that identity was only useful in front of people like Xianijia. The Archaic Alliance didn't recognize that. Being able to recognize him as a member of the Archaic Alliance was already giving face to the Green Cloud sect. If he wanted to participate in the Archaic test, he had to pass the test like everyone else. Lin Yi didn't mind at all. He walked into the group of perfect stage practitioners. No one below Golden Core would be his match, no matter what the test was. But there was one exception. It was Xue Jianfeng, who was smiling coldly at the side. This guy had been following the professor's orders and didn't show his strength. On the surface, he was still a perfect stage practitioner. He couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. If it weren't for the strict order from above not to touch Lin Yi, he would have killed Lin Yi to avenge himself. I can't kill him, but this is a fair opportunity. I can use this chance to beat him up. Even the higher-ups can't say anything about it, Xue Jianfeng thought. In the blink of an eye, everyone had lined up. Only two people stood outside. One was Xian Yijie, and the other was Bing Wuqing. While they weren't the leader, they were still Golden Core practitioners. There was no point in them participating in the test. All right, I will now announce the rules of the test. It's simple. Every team will draw lots to fight each other. There will be a round every 2 days for 10 consecutive days, and there will be a total of 5 rounds. As long as you win 3 rounds, you'll automatically qualify for the test, Xian Yijie announced. Chapter 5175. On the other hand, if one couldn't even win 3 matches, then no matter how superior one's spirit root was, it would be meaningless. There were indeed times when a genius would be buried, but if one couldn't even win 3 out of 5 matches, then he would be a complete piece of trash, and it would be meaningless to talk about anything else. After observing the crowd's reaction, Xian Yijie continued, "Of course, this rule only applies to most of the ordinary disciples. For those genius disciples with extraordinary strength, other than winning 3 out of 5 battles, there's another easier option, which is to challenge someone of a higher level." Challenge someone of a higher level? Everyone was shocked. This was something unimaginable for ordinary disciples, but it was also the label of a genius disciple. Those who could challenge someone of a higher level were not easy to deal with. Naturally, they were considered as genius disciples. That's right. You can challenge anyone of a higher level. There's no limit to the number of times, and the other party can't refuse. As long as one of you can succeed once, then you won't have to participate in the regular competition and will automatically qualify for the trial. Xian Yijie nodded. Everyone's expressions were different. Apart from the normal rules, there was also a special rule. This grand competition was well thought out. It was clear that the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance attached great importance to this. Because of this, they had to think of a way to perform well. This wasn't just related to the primeval smelting trials, it was also related to their future in the Archaic Alliance. Martial Uncle Xian, may I ask, what will happen if you can't challenge someone of a higher level or win 3 out of 5 battles in the regular competition? Everyone couldn't help but be worried. That means you don't qualify for the trial. You'll be sent back to the archaic underworld after the trial in the secular world. Of course, even if you win 3 out of 5 battles, you have to break through to the Foundation Establishment realm before the Archaic Trials begins. Otherwise, you'll be automatically removed from the Archaic Alliance and naturally, you won't be qualified to participate in the Archaic Trials. Xian Yijie explained. As soon as this was said, everyone looked at each other. According to Xian Yijie's explanation, wouldn't it mean that half of the people would be eliminated? Even though the grand competition would be held in the primeval trials in the past, and some people would be eliminated every single time, it would at most be a formality, and some people at the bottom of the rankings would be eliminated. There had never been a precedent of half of the people being eliminated. After all, the grand competition was only the prelude to the primeval trials, and it wasn't the primeval competition, so how could it be so serious? Martial Uncle Xian, this is the grand competition and not the primordial grand competition. There's no need to go so far, right? It's not normal. However, the primordial trial this time is a once-in-a-thousand-years event. The degree of danger is far more than usual. It's reasonable for the trial competition to be stricter. This is to be responsible for your safety, Xian Yijie said seriously. But if it's really for safety reasons, it's better to let us, the stronger disciples, go. There's no need to make it so complicated, right? The one who spoke was a late Foundation Establishment disciple. The other stronger disciples of the Archaic Alliance echoed him, all of them filled with righteous indignation. Now, with the rules of 3 wins out of 5 duels, the biggest victims were none other than them. Disciples like them who were at the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm or even higher should have the qualifications to participate in the primeval trials. However, once this rule was announced, even amongst them, a group of people would inevitably be eliminated. Think about it. If even dignified disciples at the peak of the Foundation Establishment realm didn't have the chance to participate in the primeval trials, Wouldn't they become the laughingstock of others if word of this got out? This is the unanimous decision of the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance. Do any of you have any objections? Xinejia's words stunned everyone. No matter how dissatisfied they were, they would never dare to go against the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance. Otherwise, not only would their future be in danger, they might even lose their lives. Moreover, although they were not weak, the ones who were really dissatisfied with this rule were only those disciples who were at the bottom of the same level. The truly outstanding core disciples of each sect would not care about this little difficulty. To put it bluntly, only the weak would complain like this. Since they were the weak, how could they have the confidence to go against the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance? If it were Bing Wuqing facing these people's complaints, she would at most snort coldly and would not even bother to explain. However, Xinejia was much more honest. Seeing that everyone seemed to be dissatisfied, he thought about it and decided to explain a little. I've already said that the purpose of this trial competition is to select disciples who have both strength and potential. Moreover, the rules of the competition are not that strict. If you really meet the requirements, it won't be difficult to qualify for the trials. However, if you only have the level but no potential, then there's nothing much to say. Instead of going to the primeval trials and hindering other disciples with more potential, it's better for you to return to the primeval Jianghu as soon as possible, said Xinejia. His words were not very pleasant to hear, but it was the truth. From the perspective of each primeval sect, the value of a disciple with foundation establishment consummation at the bottom was far less than that of a disciple with outstanding aptitude in the early stage of foundation establishment consummation. However, if these two people were to go to the primeval trials at the same time, the disciple with foundation establishment consummation would definitely benefit. After all, under normal circumstances, a disciple in the early stage of foundation establishment consummation would not be a match for a disciple with foundation establishment consummation. Therefore, it would easily lead to a situation that would be extremely troublesome for the higher-ups of all primeval sects. In the primeval trials, those talented disciples with outstanding aptitude who were worthy of being nurtured would find it difficult to advance. Instead, their opportunities would be snatched away by high-level disciples with no potential at the bottom. However, even the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance could not force that only those talented disciples could obtain the opportunities. Even if the other disciples were of a higher level and stronger strength, they had to stand aside. If such an inhumane rule was really announced, many ordinary disciples would have long rebelled. That was why there was such an unprecedented rule. Not only could it be used to select outstanding disciples of different levels, but it could also be used to eliminate those mediocre disciples who only had high levels but were actually at the bottom. It could be said that it was killing two birds with one stone to clear the obstacles for those talented disciples who were truly worthy of being nurtured. At this point, even if everyone was unwilling in their hearts, they didn't dare say anything more. After all, the matter had already been decided, and it would be useless no matter how much they grumbled. Instead, it would bring trouble to themselves, so it was better to make use of this time to properly plan for the upcoming grand competition. Chapter 5176. Everyone looked at each other, and no one spoke for a while. Challenging someone of a higher level was no small matter, not to mention that the bird that sticks out gets shot first. In this kind of situation, whoever was the first to step out to challenge someone of a higher level would be in the limelight, but at the same time, they would also be under a great deal of pressure. This was especially true for the high-level disciple they challenged. He would definitely go all out. Otherwise, if he was defeated by someone of a higher level in front of everyone, he would not be able to face anyone in the future. Lin Yi was a foundation perfection practitioner, and he was already the highest level in the tournament. Naturally, there was no such thing as challenging someone of a higher level. As for Lingshan and the others, they were only at foundation establishment not long ago, and naturally wouldn't think of challenging someone of a higher level. As a result, they waited patiently for the lots to be drawn. Half an hour passed, and still no one stood out to challenge someone of a higher level. Xinejia coughed dryly and was about to announce the draw when someone finally spoke up. "Uncle Xin, why don't I try?" The crowd went into an uproar at the words, and all eyes focused on a young man. He had delicate features and a calm aura around him. He looked like he had nothing to do with the world, but if one looked closely, they would realize that there was an indescribable aura hidden within his calmness. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but sigh to himself. This kid was extraordinary. Ling Tianyu of the Thousand Blades sect, who would you like to challenge? Xian Yiju asked. Facing this Ling Tianyu, even he, as the leader of the group, didn't dare to be careless. One had to know that this kid was the young master of the Thousand Blades sect, and this wasn't as simple as being a second-generation practitioner. Ever since the previous head of the Thousand Blades sect died in the hands of a heretic, Ling Tianyu had become the head of the Thousand Blades sect at a young age. Even though he was only at the peak of the late phase of Foundation establishment, he still received the support of the entire sect. This was not only because he had the bloodline of the former sect master, but also because the ancient Jianghu was a world where strength was respected. Without strength, bloodline inheritance was just a joke. The reason why Ling Tianyu was able to gain the recognition of the Thousand Blades faction with his cultivation at the peak of the late Foundation establishment realm was naturally not because of absolute strength, but because of his incomparable talent. It was rumored that the strongest Foundation establishment cultivator of the Archaic Alliance was Xue Jianfeng of the Snow Sword faction, but that was only because Xue Jianfeng was very high profile. On the other hand, as the young master of the Thousand Blades faction, Ling Tianyu was extremely low-key and rarely fought with others. Only the inner disciples of the Thousand Blades faction knew a thing or two about him. If the two of them really had a chance to fight, it would be very difficult to say who would win. On the contrary, more people would favor Yin Tianyu, as he was the uncrowned king. This will be interesting. Ling Tianyu will definitely challenge Xue Jianfeng. This is the battle for the #1 Foundation establishment cultivator of the Ancient Alliance. Everyone couldn't help but be excited. Ling Tianyu was an expert at the peak of the late Foundation establishment realm. He could only challenge those at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm, and his representative was Xue Jianfeng. Who was stronger between Xue Jianfeng and Ling Tianyu? This was a point that had been debated endlessly. It was a pity that the two of them had never met each other. Now they could finally have a showdown in front of everyone. It seemed that this kid really wanted to challenge him. Xue Jianfeng muttered to himself. To be honest, if he was still an expert at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm, he might really be a little afraid. After all, Ling Tianyu was no small matter. But now that he was at the early Gold Core realm, there was nothing to worry about. No matter how powerful Ling Tianyu was, could he, as a mere peak of the late Foundation establishment realm, challenge an early Gold Core realm? What a joke. Martial Uncle Xian, the person I want to challenge is him. Ling Tianyu smiled slightly, and his gaze fell on a person. This time, the crowd was in an uproar again. The person he wanted to challenge was not Xue Jianfeng, but Lin Yi. You want to challenge me? Lin Yi was also a little stunned. Yes, this should be fine, right? Ling Tianyu confirmed with his trademark gentle smile on his face. Yes. Xian Yiju nodded. He didn't know why Ling Tianyu suddenly wanted to challenge Lin Yi, but according to the rules of the competition, there was no problem. Moreover, Lin Yi couldn't refuse. Can I ask why you chose me? Lin Yi asked curiously. It was not strange for someone like Ling Tianyu to take the path of challenging those at a higher level. But instead of those disciples of the Archaic Alliance, he chose him. Did he think that he was a pushover? Forgive me for being presumptuous, but I am purely curious. Ling Tianyu nodded slightly. Curious? That's a little interesting. Lin Yi couldn't help but be amused. He turned to Xian Yijie and said, Then can we start now? Yes, we can. Only after the challenge is over will we start the competition by drawing lots. Xian Yijie nodded, and then reminded in a low voice, Martial Uncle, this Ling Tianyu is not to be trifled with. You must be careful. If you lose to someone at a higher level, not only will you lose face, you will also lose the qualification to participate in the competition. Although the sentence was not said clearly, everyone knew that it was the truth. In this grand competition, Even disciples who were at a disadvantage in a battle of the same level would be disqualified. If they were defeated by someone who was a level higher than them, then there was no need to say anything more. I know. Lin Yi smiled indifferently. This Ling Tianyu seemed a little unfathomable. Unfortunately, he was an existence comparable to a magnate realm expert. No matter how strong Ling Tianyu's aptitude was, he was just a seedling in Lin Yi's eyes. There was really nothing to worry about. Challenging someone of a higher level would attract a lot of attention, and everyone retreated to the side, leaving Lin Yi and Ling Tianyu alone. Then, sorry for offending you. Ling Tianyu cupped his hands with a smile, and then slowly took out a silk belt from his bosom in front of everyone. Everyone was puzzled. Could this silk belt be his weapon? This Ling Tianyu is said to be a god. Why would he use such a sissy weapon? Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. That's right. Our archaic alliance has always attached importance to weapons, and all the cultivation of the Thousand Blades faction is based on weapons. As the young master of the Thousand Blades faction, Ling Tianyu should have inherited a divine weapon. Why would he use a sissy silk belt? It doesn't look like a big deal. Someone frowned and muttered. Not only them, but even Bing Wuqing, Xue Jianfeng, and Xian Yijia were staring at the ribbon fluttering in the air. They were all experts in the gold core stage, but none of them would underestimate Ling Tianyu. After all, he was someone who could become the leader of the Thousand Blades sect. Chapter 5177. As far as the disciples of the Thousand Blades faction were concerned, even ordinary disciples in the Foundation establishment realm could control more than a dozen weapons at the same time. Those with better aptitude could control dozens of weapons at the same time. However, it was very difficult for them to advance further. When they reached the nascent soul realm, they could at most control 100 weapons at the same time. Lin Yi had only roughly studied the Thousand Blades sect's practitioner's arts, but he knew where the difficulties lay. The biggest difficulty lay in multitasking. Controlling each weapon required a part of one's attention, and it wasn't easy for a normal person to do two things at the same time. Controlling 100 weapons at the same time required 100 multitasking. Even an idiot could figure out how difficult this was. It was definitely at an inhuman level. However, the Ling Tianyu in front of him was puzzling. He did not show a lot of weapons like the other disciples of the Thousand Blades faction. Instead, he only showed a ribbon that seemed to be harmless. What did this mean? Was he hiding his strength? Or was this inconspicuous ribbon his trump card? Lin Yi did not move. He just stood there quietly, waiting for Ling Tianyu's next move. At his level, it was impossible for him to treat the other party as a real threat. However, he would not underestimate the enemy. He was observing Ling Tianyu and coping with all changes by remaining unchanged. While Lin Yi was observing Ling Tianyu was also observing his reaction. As he said, he was indeed very curious about Lin Yi. A powerful primordial spirit expert, the martial granduncle of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island, Lin Yi was a mystery to all the disciples of the primordial age. Although Ling Tianyu had not made any moves in the past 10 months, he felt that it was necessary to understand Lin Yi's background in both the short and long term. Otherwise, there would be one more uncontrollable factor in the upcoming primordial trial. Suddenly, the ribbon that was fluttering in the air became taut with a swish. Then, with a piercing sound, it shot toward Lin Yi like a sharp arrow. Everyone's expression changed when they saw this. To be able to have such power, it seemed that this ribbon was indeed not an ordinary item. Facing the ribbon that was rushing toward him, Lin Yi was still unmoved. Until the ribbon was less than half a foot away from him, he stretched out 2 fingers and calmly clamped it. Xian Yijia nodded secretly. This scene seemed ordinary, but it was not easy to be as calm as Lin Yi. At least, no one present could do it. Even he, a master in the early stage of Gold Core Realm, dared not guarantee it. However, the ribbon did not stop after being clamped. Instead, it wriggled wildly like a snake. But in the eyes of others, it was just a futile struggle. After all, how could a soft ribbon do any damage? However, Lin Yi's expression changed. He chose to let go of it without hesitation. Almost at the same time when he let go, a large number of flying needles suddenly shot out from the ribbon. This scene was so sudden that everyone present gasped and looked horrified. Almost all of them were deceived by the inconspicuous shape of the ribbon. They did not expect that there were so many flying needles hidden in the ribbon. If it had been them, they would have already been pierced by the flying needles and died without a burial ground with just one move. It was a pity that Ling Tianyu was facing Lin Yi. Even if these flying needles were hidden very well and almost integrated with the ribbon, it was difficult to be detected by the divine sense under normal circumstances. However, Lin Yi not only had a far more sensitive divine sense than ordinary people, but also a beast-like sense of danger. If he did not detect them in advance, how could he suddenly let go of the ribbon? What a powerful movement technique! Ling Tianyu's eyes brightened. What shocked him was not that Lin Yi could detect them in advance, but that Lin Yi could calmly dodge the sudden attack of the flying needles at such a close distance and come out unscathed. With Ling Tianyu's identity, his sparring partners in the Thousand Blades sect were at least in the Gold Core stage. However, even if they were experts in the Gold Core stage, they could at most block his flying needles with their protective genuine chi. No one had ever been able to dodge it completely like Lin Yi. Such a movement technique was simply unheard of and unseen. Likewise, to be able to practice the legendary flying blades of 1,000 blades, Your Excellency, is also not simple. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Flying blades of 1,000 blades. Hearing this, everyone was shocked again. They carefully counted the number of flying needles flying in the air at this moment. Only then did they exclaim in shock, 999 flying needles and that ribbon. It really is a flying blades of 1,000 blades. How is this possible? Isn't 1,000 blades flying together just an illusory legend? Ling Tianyu can actually do it? Even though they had seen it with their own eyes, they still felt it was incredible. One had to know that the 100 blades simultaneous release was already very impressive. Even the experts of the 1,000 Blades faction had to be at least nascent soul realm old monsters to be able to do it. Multitasking wasn't something that could be practiced just because one wanted to. If one didn't have enough aptitude, it would be useless even if one practiced for thousands of years. As for the 1,000 Blades simultaneous release, that required one to multitask 1,000 times. The difficulty was more than 10,000 times that of multitasking. This wasn't something that humans could do, but the truth was right in front of them. Ling Tianyu, who was merely at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, had managed to achieve the legendary 1,000 blades flying together. Was he even human? No wonder everyone in the 1,000 Blades sect supports him to be the sect leader. He's such an amazing genius. No wonder. Xi and Ijia finally understood. Regarding the matter of Ling Tianyu becoming the sect leader of the 1,000 Blades sect, the entire Archaic Alliance had different guesses, including the higher-ups of the various archaic sects and families. No matter how talented he was, it was too childish to let Ling Tianyu, who was only at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, become the sect leader of a sect. But now that he had seen the 1,000 Blades flying together with his own eyes, Xi and Ijia finally understood that the 1,000 Blades sect was not stupid. Instead, it was because they had found a powerful backer. Once this Ling Tianyu grew up, no one in the entire Archaic Alliance would be his opponent. At that time, the 1,000 Blades sect would definitely sweep away the declining trend and have a promising future. Not only Xi and Ijia, but even Bing Wuqing, who was next to him, was moved. Ling Tianyu, who had achieved the 1,000 Blades flying together, could not be measured by common sense. Even if he was only at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, he was enough to be on an equal footing with experts in the Gold Core stage. If time passed, even they would have to look up to him. Chapter 5178. He had always thought that he was worthy of his title as the #1 in the Foundation establishment realm and could suppress Ling Tianyu. Now that he thought about it, it was really ridiculous. In front of the 1,000 flying blades, he, the so-called #1 in the Foundation establishment realm, was nothing. No, this Ling Tianyu must be eliminated while he was still young. Otherwise, he would definitely be a great trouble in the future. Although he was proud, Xue Jianfeng was not a fool. It was true that he was an early-stage Gold Core realm expert, had a father who was the deputy head of the Snow Sword faction, and had a mysterious and powerful backer in the center. But all of these were nothing in front of Ling Tianyu's 1,000 flying blades. Such a threat must be nipped in the bud. Your Excellency has good eyesight. I admire you. Ling Tianyu was slightly taken aback. He didn't expect Lin Yi's observation skills to be so sharp that he could count the number of flying needles in an instant. If it wasn't for his reminder, the others might not have realized this so quickly. You're too polite. I didn't expect to see the glory of the 1,000 flying blades today. The Archaic Alliance is really full of talents. But it's a pity. Lin Yi shook his head meaningfully. What's a pity? Ling Tianyu looked at him and asked. Everyone present was also curious. This was the legendary 1,000 flying blades. What was there to pity about? Of course it's a pity that your current realm is too low. Given time, you can indeed become an expert. As for now, you're still far from that level, Lin Yi said bluntly in front of everyone. Everyone looked at him, thinking that this guy really knew how to show off. They didn't know that what Lin Yi said was the truth. Ling Tianyu's 1,000 flying blades was indeed real, but his 1,000 flying blades were all insignificant flying needles. All of them added up didn't even weigh half a gene. Even if it was the 1,000 flying blades, it was only the weakest version. It was fine to scare others, but it was unrealistic to scare Lin Yi. Moreover, with the strength of Lin Yi's body, let alone the weakest version, even if the 1,000 flying blades were real divine weapons, he would at most be a formidable opponent. How could he be scared? Really? Then I'll have to ask for your guidance. Although Ling Tianyu still had a gentle expression on his face, he was, after all, the young master of the 1,000 Blades sect, a supreme figure who had mastered the flying blades technique. It would be strange if his arrogance wasn't provoked by Lin Yi's words. Go ahead. Lin Yi smiled faintly and made a gesture of invitation. However, in the eyes of the people around him, it was pure pretentiousness. Ling Tianyu's expression froze. His 10 fingers moved slightly, and the 999 flying needles floating in the air instantly condensed on the ribbon. The ribbon twisted back and forth, and the tip twisted into the shape of a snake's head. At first glance, it looked exactly like a hydralisk with long thorns all over its body. The hydralisk danced rapidly in the air, whistling fiercely. Its momentum was terrifying, and the onlookers could not help but tremble with fear. Even Xian Ijia, a master in the early stage of Gold Core, felt his eyelids twitching. Only Lin Yi, who was in the field, was not in a hurry. Instead, the corner of his mouth slightly raised to reveal a playful smile. After hovering for a moment, the hydralisk suddenly pounced on Lin Yi from behind. Its speed was extremely fast, but Lin Yi was faster. He easily dodged it with a flash. It's only Martial Granduncle. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to dodge this attack. Xian Ijia commented. This was not a compliment to Lin Yi, but the truth. The attack of the hydralisk was so fast that even with his body movement, it was impossible for him to avoid it easily. Looking at the whole field, there was no other person except Lin Yi. No matter how fast your body movement is, can you avoid the Divine Dragon's tail whip? Ling Tianyu was extremely confident. The hydralisk was covered with flying needles. In the face of such an attack, ordinary people's first reaction was not to face it head-on. They were not only afraid of pain, but also afraid of poison. Therefore, Lin Yi's response was completely within his expectation. The hydralisk was more than 3 feet long, and it had already surrounded Lin Yi. Therefore, no matter how Lin Yi dodged, it was impossible for him to avoid this long-prepared move. Divine Dragon's tail whip? Lin Yi smiled and released a murderous aura of the 5 elements. Why don't we see whose dragon is more powerful? The dragon roared, and the murderous aura of the 5 elements immediately met the hydralisk. Then, with a loud bang, the hydralisk was torn into pieces, and the flying needles fell to the ground. How could this be? Ling Tianyu couldn't help but turn pale. He was very confident in his move. Even an expert in the early stage of Gold Core Realm said that it was difficult to deal with the Divine Dragon's tail whip. He didn't expect that it would be easily broken by Lin Yi. Moreover, it was a domineering way of meeting force with force. More importantly, it was only a stream of genuine qi. How could there be such a terrifying genuine qi in the world? Was this person really only at the peak of Foundation establishment? Only Lin Yi himself was not surprised. No matter how powerful the 1,000 blades flying together was, could it be more powerful than the murderous aura of the 5 elements? There is always someone better than you. There is nothing strange about this, right? Lin Yi smiled faintly and said, "If the 1,000 blades flying together only has this little strength, it is too disappointing." In his view, the hydralisk that Ling Tianyu made was not ordinary. At first glance, it seemed to be in line with the principle that the weapons of the 1,000 blades sect complemented each other. But this principle was only for ordinary disciples. For a genius like Ling Tianyu, it was too mediocre. If the legendary 1,000 blades flying together was really used in this way, it would be useless. Really? My skills are not good enough. I have embarrassed myself in front of you. Ling Tianyu looked as calm as usual at this time, without the slightest hint of worry. However, the movements of his hands did not stop at all. After the flying needles fell, they did not recondense on the ribbon. Instead, they simply formed their own formation. At first glance, they looked like a dense swarm of bees. Although the attacks between them seemed messy, they cooperated with each other, as if there was some kind of profound military strategy. Oh, arrangement, this is a little interesting. Lin Yi controlled the murderous aura of the 5 elements to deal with these flying needles with great interest. The more he fought, the more shocked he became. This Ling Tianyu's talent was really very high. In terms of power, although the flying needles were far inferior to the hydralisk, they had become more difficult to deal with now that they had broken up into smaller groups. Just a little interesting? Ling Tianyu smiled. Before his voice died away, the swarm of flying needle bees, which had been big and small just a moment ago, became even more scattered. Almost every flying needle was fighting on its own. The power of each attack became weaker, but at the same time, it became more frequent and harder to guard against. Chapter 5179. If these flying needles were poisoned, Lin Yi would have been a corpse long ago. Xue Jianfeng sneered at the scene. For him, both Lin Yi and Ling Tianyu were targets that had to be eliminated. Unfortunately, because of the order from the higher-ups of the center, he did not have the guts to touch Lin Yi at all. Ling Tianyu was the lifeblood of the 1,000 Blades faction. If he touched this guy, the entire 1,000 Blades faction would have to fight him to the death. With his current strength, it was tantamount to setting himself on fire. Humph, the 1,000 Blades faction used to be one of the 4 major sects and families. Although it has declined now, it is still a decent faction. As the head of the 1,000 Blades faction, how could Ling Tianyu use such insidious and despicable means? Xian Yijie glanced at Xue Jianfeng disdainfully. A gentleman would not do such a thing, but it was obvious that Xue Jianfeng did not feel any pressure at all. Xue Jianfeng snorted disdainfully. If it was in the past, he would still care about his image, but after being crippled twice, his temperament had changed greatly. Especially now that he was secretly relying on the center, he would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. Sinister methods like poison were naturally not a problem. At this time, Bing Wuqing suddenly said, "Even if the needles are really poisoned, Ling Tianyu cannot hurt Lin Yi at all." What? Everyone was shocked when they heard this. After a closer look, they finally found that although the 999 flying needles of Ling Tianyu had surrounded Lin Yi so tightly that it was impossible to defend against them, so far, Lin Yi had not been pierced by a single needle. 90% of the flying needles were dodged by Lin Yi's body movement. As for the remaining 10%, every time they got close to Lin Yi, They were blocked by his protective genuine chi and could not advance an inch, let alone cause any damage. What a strong protective genuine chi! Everyone was shocked. At the level of Foundation Establishment consummation, the strength of the protective genuine chi was indeed strong enough to block ordinary punches, palms, and blunt weapons. But Ling Tianyu's flying needles were almost the natural enemy of protective genuine chi. It only took 1% of protective genuine chi to defend against ordinary attacks, but 10% of protective genuine chi was needed to defend against flying needles. Lin Yi was just a peak Foundation Establishment expert. He wasn't even a Golden Core stage expert, so how could his protective chi be so strong? TSK, no matter how strong his protective chi is, what's the point? Even if Lin Yi can hold on for a while, he won't be able to withstand it for long. Sooner or later, he will be exhausted to death by Ling Tianyu. In my opinion, Lin Yi, this salted fish, can't turn over a new leaf. How dare he call himself the martial granduncle of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island? This time, he was successfully challenged by someone who was a level higher than him, and he was the first one. You've really lost all your face. Xue Jianfeng took the opportunity to ridicule. Xian Yijie frowned, but did not refute. At least from the current situation, Lin Yi was not in a good situation. As long as he could not get rid of the attack of 999 flying needles, he could only rely on his protective genuine chi to fight with Ling Tianyu. Moreover, every time Ling Tianyu consumed a little bit of his protective genuine chi, he would consume 10 or even 100 of his protective genuine chi. Bing Wuqing, on the other hand, was full of disapproval, but she did not show it on her face. After all, he had fought with Lin Yi before. Even he, a Golden Core late-stage expert, couldn't do anything to Lin Yi, let alone Ling Tianyu, who was only at the peak of the Foundation Establishment late stage. As for Ling Shan and the others, they were even less worried. Even if they could not see anything with their level, they had absolute confidence in Lin Yi. 1,000 flying needles were nothing. As time passed, Lin Yi was still trapped in the attack of 999 flying needles. The situation was as tense as before. This kind of battle of attrition was within everyone's expectations. However, what surprised them was that Lin Yi had been holding on until now without a scratch. What was even more ridiculous was that he seemed to be at ease and did not seem to be at the end of his rope. This kid could really hold on. Xue Jianfeng furrowed his brows. Compared to Ling Tianyu, who was a potential formidable opponent, Xue Jianfeng's brows furrowed. Compared to Ling Tianyu, who was a potential rival, he was more inclined to humiliate Lin Yi. After all, there was a bloody feud between him and Lin Yi. He immediately said, "Uncle Xian, it's almost the time for 2 incense sticks to burn. Are we going to let them continue like this? It's completely meaningless. There should be a time limit, right?" There is no time limit. There are only 2 results in all the battles of the trial competition. Either the winner is decided directly, or someone admits defeat. There is no third possibility. Xian Yijie glanced at him and curled his lips. You're talking about a normal competition, but this is a cross-level challenge. We can't keep dragging on, can we? Are we going to let everyone wait like this? It's been 2 incense sticks time. Anyone can tell who is stronger. Uncle Xian, are you being selfish and siding with the Green Cloud sex people from the North Island? Xue Jianfeng said in a strange tone. Oh, who is stronger and who is weaker? Why can't I see it? Why don't you, Xue Jianfeng, tell us? Xian Yijie snorted. Of course. Xue Jianfeng was about to say that Lin Yi was obviously going to lose, but Lin Yi suddenly flashed and appeared in front of Ling Tianyu. Xue Jianfeng was speechless, and the others were also in an uproar. Lin Yi had been trapped for so long, and everyone thought that he was at his wit's end. Who would have thought that he would come out just like that? Was this guy teasing Ling Tianyu all the time? Everyone was dumbfounded, and Ling Tianyu, as the person involved, was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. The speed that Lin Yi showed before was frightening enough, but his speed was several times faster than before. It was hard to imagine such an amazing speed. But compared to this, there was something else that shocked Ling Tianyu even more. His 999 flying needles had surrounded Lin Yi tightly, with no openings or openings at all. How did Lin Yi get out unscathed? Before Ling Tianyu could make a further response, Lin Yi had lost the interest to continue playing with him. What greeted him was an unstoppable 1,000 legs of frenzy. After all, Lin Yi had almost tested Ling Tianyu's strength. Although Ling Tianyu had unlimited potential, he was still far from being able to make a name for himself. There was still a long way to go. Lin Yi's 1,000 legs of frenzy was extremely fast, and he appeared very abruptly, so it was even more difficult to guard against it. Even an expert in the early stage of Gold Core like Xianijia could not avoid it completely. However, Ling Tianyu took advantage of the situation and rolled on the ground, dodging the oncoming frenzy 1,000 kicks. Although he looked a little ragged, it was still enough to make Lin Yi look at him in a higher light. Even the people around him gasped in admiration. Chapter 50, 180. Stop. I admit defeat. Ling Tianyu shouted at the last moment. Only Lin Yi could retract his leg at this moment. If it was someone else, he would have kicked Ling Tianyu away. However, Lin Yi withdrew his leg effortlessly. He looked at Ling Tianyu meaningfully and thought to himself, this guy is really not easy to deal with. All geniuses were prideful. Even if a peerless genius like Ling Tianyu looked gentle and low-key on the surface, he was absolutely prideful in the bottom of his heart. This kind of person was usually very prideful. Even if they were forced into a desperate situation, it would be more difficult than ascending to the heavens to make them admit defeat. Unexpectedly, Ling Tianyu chose to admit defeat so decisively. Moreover, he was as calm as usual from the beginning to the end, without the slightest expression of shame or embarrassment. Just this temperament alone was already extremely remarkable. With extraordinary talent and profound shrewdness, even Lin Yi had to admit that Ling Tianyu would be a formidable figure in the future if he really grew up. Well, I hereby announce that Lin Yi wins. Xianijia announced on the spot. Everyone had not recovered from the shock until now. They were still immersed in the rhythm of the stalemate just now, but the winner was actually decided in the blink of an eye. This was too fucking sudden. Lin Yi looked indifferent. He turned around and was about to leave the arena. At this time, Ling Tianyu suddenly said behind him, "May I ask you a question?"
Speak.
Lin Yi turned his head and looked at him. "How did you get rid of my flying needles just now?" Ling Tianyu asked. Logically speaking, his flying needle should have covered all 360 degrees without any blind spots, but Lin Yi was able to get out of it so easily, and he wasn't hurt at all. It was really confusing. In fact, he was not the only one who had this question. Everyone present also had this question. The only exception was Bing Wuqing. She was the only one who had seen Lin Yi's semi-primordial spirit state. Think about it yourself. Lin Yi smiled faintly.
He was not stupid.
The semi-primordial spirit state was his biggest trump card now. How could he reveal it to others so casually, especially in such a public place with so many eyes? All right, then I'll seek your guidance next time. Ling Tianyu didn't continue pestering him. There was still a faint smile on his face, and he didn't look like a loser who had just admitted defeat. Although he had indeed lost, it was just an insignificant match after all. He still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet. After all, there was no need to use it unless it was absolutely necessary. Compared to his life-saving trump card, what was the big deal about admitting defeat and surrendering? Xue Jianfeng was speechless when he saw this scene. For him, the ideal situation for Lin Yi to fight against Ling Tianyu was for both sides to suffer. But now, both of them were completely unscathed. Ling Tianyu, this brat, admitted defeat just like that. Instead, he acted as if they appreciated each other's talents.
It was truly a pain in the ass.
After both of them returned to their respective teams, Xianijia continued to ask in a loud voice, "Who else wants to challenge a higher level?" This time, no one made a sound. Even a supreme character like Ling Tianyu had lost. It could be seen how difficult it was to challenge someone of a higher level. This was tantamount to a heavy blow to their heads. They didn't dare to act rashly anymore. Challenging someone of a higher level was not a small matter. Not everyone would be as lenient as Lin Yi. What if they didn't have eyes and picked a ruthless person? What if the other party attacked ruthlessly, or even killed you? There was no rule that no one could kill you in this competition. Of course, the silence was only temporary. There were many people who were ready to make a move. It was just that the rules had just been announced, and they hadn't found a suitable target to challenge yet. In another 2 days, when they were almost ready, those who had the strength and confidence to challenge someone of a higher level would really emerge. In that case, let's start drawing lots. Xi and Ijia immediately arranged for each team to draw lots. Although it was a little complicated, there were less than 100 people in total. He could handle it all by himself. The first to start was the strongest team of Foundation Establishment Perfection. Including Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng, there were only 8 people in total. They were all core disciples of various primordial sects, and they were all leading senior brothers. The duel between them almost represented the competition of the strongest disciples of their respective sections. It could be said to be full of gimmicks and naturally attracted attention. After the results of the drawing lots were out, Xi and Ijia took a look and smiled. He shook his head and sighed. It's a pity that the entire Primordial Alliance wasn't mobilized for this trial in the secular world. Only the Central Island Alliance and the North Island Alliance were gathered. Otherwise, we could really make a ranking of the strongest disciples of the Primordial Alliance. The 8 people drew lots for 4 teams. Although Lin Yi had just fought a fierce battle with Ling Tianyu, he didn't receive any special treatment. Of course, he could also choose to forfeit, but then he would only have 4 chances left. He had to win 3 out of 4 to qualify for the trial. It should be known that it was pure bad luck to be picked by someone to challenge someone of a higher level than him. If he lost, he would be eliminated. Even if he won, there would be no benefit. Not to mention that his true chi would be wasted. He would also have to participate in the competition of the same level. It couldn't be helped. The rules were cruel. They didn't ask for fairness, only survival of the fittest. After all, the trial competition was to prepare for the primordial trials, and there was no such thing as fairness in the primordial trials. Let alone this kind of battle, there was no such thing as fairness in the primordial trials. Xue Jianfeng rubbed his palms together. He wanted to take this opportunity to teach Lin Yi a good lesson. Although he had absolute confidence in his strength as an early-stage gold core expert, since Lin Yi had just been exhausted by Ling Tianyu, it would be a waste not to take advantage of this situation and save some energy. Unfortunately, the result of the draw didn't go his way. In the end, Xue Jianfeng didn't encounter Lin Yi. Instead, he encountered the leading senior brother of another primordial sect. He couldn't help but curse his bad luck. Fortunately, he still had 4 chances. Every time they drew a new lot, it was theoretically very easy for them to draw the same opponent. If it was a coincidence, it was possible for them to draw the same opponent 5 times. This was one of the special rules of this trial tournament. Not only was it a test of raw strength, but it was also a test of everyone's ability to adapt and recover. Any weakness in this aspect could become a fatal flaw. Of course, if luck wasn't on his side, this sort of rule could very well cause Xue Jianfeng to miss out on Lin Yi in this competition, and Xue Jianfeng would have to save his revenge for the primeval trials. Chapter 50, 181. At the same time, Xue Jianfeng's side was also like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. After all, he had the foundation of the first person in the Foundation Establishment realm. Even if he didn't reveal the strength of the early stage of Gold Core, it was still easy for him to deal with ordinary experts in the peak of Foundation Establishment realm. With the 2 of them as the foundation, all the 4 matches of the disciples in the peak of Foundation Establishment realm ended very quickly. The total time spent was only half an hour, much faster than Xi and Ijia had expected. After the peak of Foundation Establishment realm, the next match was between the disciples in the late stage of Foundation Establishment realm. Among them, the one who received the most attention was naturally Ling Tianyu, who had just failed in his cross-level challenge. Although his strength was unparalleled among those at the same level as him, he had just consumed a lot of genuine qi on Lin Yi. More importantly, his moves and routines were seen clearly by others. It was enough time for him to come up with a countermeasure. With all these disadvantages added together, he was no longer a strong enemy to be avoided in the eyes of others, but a ready-made soft persimmon, which made the other disciples in the late stage of Foundation establishment realm restless. If they could defeat Ling Tianyu today, it would not be as simple as a victory for them. More importantly, it would be enough to make them famous and gain both fame and fortune. The benefits were self-evident. However, it turned out that Ling Tianyu was Ling Tianyu after all. As the young head of the Thousand Blade sect, he was definitely not someone that ordinary people could mess with. His defeat to Lin Yi only highlighted Lin Yi's strength, but absolutely did not mean that he was weak. At least in front of these experts at the same level as him, Ling Tianyu was invincible. So what if his moves and routines were seen clearly by others? Putting aside the fact that his flying blades of 1,000 blades was not so easy to crack, he didn't even need to use it to deal with these experts at the same level as him. He could casually launch 100 blades of 1,000 blades, and no one could block it. Like Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng, Ling Tianyu also easily finished the match in one move. In the face of his overwhelming strength, these disciples in the late stage of Foundation establishment realm could only accept the fate of being crushed. As for becoming famous after one battle, they really thought too much. One match after another, the strength of the disciples decreased from high to low. Following that was the competition between disciples in the later stage of Foundation building realm, the peak of the middle stage of Foundation building realm, the middle stage of Foundation building realm, and the peak of the early stage of Foundation building realm. Since Xianijia was the only judge and the space was limited, there could only be one duel at a time. Naturally, it would take a long time, but fortunately, the total number of people wasn't too high. As long as there were no accidents, the arrangement of one round every 2 days was already very lenient. Without Lin Yi, Xue Jianfeng, and Ling Tianyu, the rest of the duels were obviously much more boring. The only exception was a duel between Foundation building realm cultivators in the later stages of the Foundation building realm. That was because there was also a hot topic in this duel, Lung Lung. Thinking back, when she first came to the secular world, she was only in the early stage of Foundation establishment. Ever since she got to know Lin Yi, her strength had risen rapidly. After taking a stroll outside, she was already in the middle stage of Foundation establishment. Now, after a few months of hard cultivation on the Transfer Islands, her strength had skyrocketed to the late stage of Foundation establishment. She was even only a step away from the peak of the late stage of Foundation establishment. All in all, it had only been 10 months. She had advanced by leaps and bounds from the early stage of Foundation establishment to the late stage of Foundation establishment. Such a miracle might not be unparalleled in the ancient Jianghu, but it was definitely unprecedented. Moreover, Lung Lung wasn't someone without strength for nothing. Her crushed ice physique was 1 in a million. Once the advantage of it was truly developed, it would be no small matter. With Lung Lung's strength, it was naturally much easier for her to deal with an ordinary expert of the same level. It was just that she had yet to find a way to fully unleash the power of the crushed ice physique. Therefore, she wasn't as shocked as Lin Yi and the others. The whole process was without any surprises or danger. However, there was a little accident at the end. Lung Lung had a breakthrough on the spot. Although this was rare, it was not unheard of. During a duel, the state of one's essence, qi, and spirit would be elevated to the best. If one was already on the verge of a breakthrough, it wasn't strange for one to accidentally take advantage of the situation to break through. It was just that this would easily give the opponent an opportunity to take advantage of. That person had already been beaten up by Lung Lung to the point that he had no strength to fight back. If it wasn't for Lung Lung's mercy, he would have been beaten to the ground long ago. At this moment, when he saw an opportunity to fight back, he couldn't care less about etiquette and honor. He quickly waited for the opportunity to strike. Compared to being scolded for being shameless, it was more beneficial to get the victory in his hands. However, before he could make a move, he suddenly felt a chill on his back. An inexplicable, vital energy actually entered his head in a single line. His entire person was instantly stunned. Until Lung Lung successfully broke through to the peak of the late stage of Foundation establishment, he didn't dare to move an inch. He muttered and doubted everything, looking as if he had lost his soul. Everyone thought that he was frightened by Lung Lung's crushed ice physique. Little did they know that Lin Yi was the mastermind behind all this. Just like that, Lung Lung took the first victory without any mishaps. At the same time, she also stepped into the threshold of the late stage of Foundation establishment. From the next round onwards, she would be competing with those late-stage Foundation establishment disciples on the same stage. If luck was on her side, her next opponent might be Ling Tianyu. Without further ado, when all the teams above the early stage of Foundation establishment had finished, an entire day had passed. Other than those disciples who were heavily injured and needed to rest quietly, the others had been waiting at the side the whole time. Although Xi and Ijie didn't forbid them from moving freely, as long as it wasn't their turn to draw lots, they could totally go back and rest. However, no one was willing to give up this great opportunity to observe the other disciples. After all, they might be their future opponents. Only by knowing oneself and knowing the enemy could one gain the upper hand. Ling Shan and the others were observing as well, exchanging their opinions from time to time. Although they didn't have the intention to challenge those who were of a higher level than them, since the previous battles weren't against early-stage Foundation establishment disciples, they wouldn't be their opponents in the future. At first glance, it seemed like they were doing useless work, and they might as well rest and build up their strength like the other early-stage Foundation establishment disciples. However, to them, this day of observation was quite fruitful. In the past 3 days, they had already memorized what Lin Yi had taught them, and they had also practiced the counter moves that Lin Yi had come up with more than 100 times. However, that was just theory after all. It was hard to say if it would actually be of any use. Chapter 50, 182. Finally, Xi and Ijie announced loudly, "Next, we'll begin drawing lots for the Foundation establishment disciples. First match, Luo Shaoxing of Snow Sword Sect against Lingshan of the Common World." With that, Xue Jianfeng's eyes lit up. He didn't have much of a relationship with Luo Shaoxing, but he was still a disciple of the Snow Sword Sect. This was a great opportunity. "Brother Luo, can I talk to you?" Xue Jianfeng hooked his finger at Luo Shaoxing. Xue Jianfeng was no longer a cripple. With his strength and status, there was naturally no one in the Snow Sword School who would disobey him. Luo Shaoxing was immediately overwhelmed by the favor. He immediately followed Xue Jianfeng and said with a fawning expression, "What instructions does senior brother Xue have for me? How confident are you against this Lingshan?" Xue Jianfeng asked casually. 10. Luo Shaoxing said confidently. He had already been an early-stage Foundation establishment expert for more than 10 years. Even though he had not broken through, that was only because he did not have any medicinal pills. Among all the early-stage Foundation establishment disciples in the Snow Sword School, he was one of the best. Right now, he was only facing a newcomer who had just broken through and had an unstable foundation. Furthermore, it was a woman from the secular world. If he could still lose, he could go eat shit. That's good. This battle concerns the face of our Snow Sword sect, and we can't lose, but... Xue Jianfeng looked at Lingshan from head to toe, killing intent flashing in his eyes. Luo Shaoxing followed his gaze and looked over. He rolled his eyes and said, "I know. Don't worry, senior brother Xue. I will stop when the time is right. I will not be ruthless." Lingshan was, after all, a rare beauty, and he thought that Xue Jianfeng was eyeing her. "Wrong. I want you to do the exact opposite." Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly. He did think about Lingshan before, and not just her but the other beauties like Ziyu as well. If it weren't for Shirhan and Changyi staying in the common world, he'd even think about taking out Lin Yi's harem. But now wasn't the time to be obsessed with beauties. As long as he was strong enough, he could have as many beauties as he wanted. The most important thing right now was to attack Lin Yi. The exact opposite? What do you mean? Luo Shaoxing was stunned. Very simple. I want you to kill her. Shui Jianfeng said in a deep voice.
Kill.
Shaoxing jumped in fright. His name was Shaoxing, and he'd killed quite a lot of people in the past, but facing a beauty like Lingshan, he really couldn't bring himself to do it. Plus, this was the tournament, and while killing wasn't prohibited, he wouldn't do it unless there was a huge grudge. That's right. In the future, as long as it's Lin Yi's people, I'll reward them handsomely for every one of them I kill. Otherwise, it means that they're not giving me face. Do as you see fit, Shui Jianfeng said with a cold snort. All right, senior brother Shui, just wait and see. At this point, Luo Shaoxing didn't hesitate at all. He was an early-phase disciple, and if he offended Shui Jianfeng, he wouldn't be able to survive in the Snow Sword School anymore. Plus, swords had no eyes, and even if he accidentally killed someone in the tournament, he wouldn't have to take any responsibility. Shui Jianfeng was whispering to Luo Shaoxing, thinking that he had lowered his voice very much, but he didn't expect Lin Yi's senses to be far above his, a master at the early stage of Golden Core, and he could hear everything clearly. Lin Yi immediately reminded Lingshan, "Be careful later. That guy listened to Shui Jianfeng, and he's ready to kill you. If you can't do it, just surrender. Don't risk it, safety first, understand?" "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Lingshan nodded, and under the cheers of the crowd, she walked into the ring with a calm expression, looking quite like a general. Lin Yi nodded to himself. Lingshan had been training in the department for years, and while her strength hadn't improved much due to the limitations of the environment, her temperament had matured quite a bit. From a certain perspective, this kind of change was even better than the improvement of her strength. Xian Yijie gave the order, and the battle officially began. Lingshan didn't plan to attack first, since she was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of raw strength. Attacking first wouldn't give her the upper hand, and would instead expose an opening for the opponent to take advantage of. The best strategy for her was to defend and counterattack. Luo Shaoxing smiled at the sight of Lingshan's posture. "If that's the case, then I won't hold back. This blade of mine is called the Life Killer Blade, and when it's drawn, there will be blood. Good luck, miss." He was already looking down on Lingshan, and now he didn't care about her at all. He pulled his blade out of its sheath and slashed vertically. There didn't seem to be anything special about it at first glance, as if it was just a casual slash from someone underestimating their enemy. "You don't even use the snow sword arts, and you think you can kill me just like that?" Lingshan frowned and chose to dodge. If it wasn't for Lin Yi's warning, she would have attacked already. She didn't take the bait. Luo Shaoxing also frowned. His strike was indeed ordinary. In the eyes of others, it was purely relying on brute force, without the slightest bit of subtlety. Little did they know that this was just a camouflage on the surface. Luo Shaoxing looked like a big guy on the surface, but he was actually very shrewd. His attitude of underestimating his enemy was 30% real, but the other 70% was just for show. If Lingshan were to attack recklessly, she'd be falling right into his trap. His slash looked very crude, but it was actually a very dangerous move. With just a thought, he could turn it into one of the most dangerous moves of the Snow Sword School, the Snow Killing form. Lingshan still didn't know that she'd just walked right in front of death's door. If she really did fall into Luo Shaoxing's trap, she wouldn't be able to survive with her current strength unless Lin Yi forcefully interfered. She'd lose if that happened. She was completely oblivious to all of this, only following Lin Yi's instructions. She held back for a full 10 moves and was forced back by Luo Shaoxing. She was in a dangerous situation, but fortunately, her early phase strength wasn't just for show. Even if she couldn't win against Luo Shaoxing head-on, she could still hold on for a while if she focused on dodging. Haha, I don't know what kind of stupid move Lin Yi gave her, letting Luo Shaoxing use the snow form so easily. Is there even a need to fight now? Shui Jianfeng mocked. Chapter 50, 183. This time, even Xian Yijie could only frown. He was a discerning man. He knew that the most dangerous thing when fighting with the disciples of the Snow Sword School was to be connected into the snow momentum by them. Therefore, he repeatedly told the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island not to avoid the fight when fighting with the disciples of the Snow Sword School. Even if it was a little bit risky, they should try their best to get the first move. As long as they could make the opponents confused, the snow momentum would collapse by itself. It was a pity that he only said these words to the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect and didn't dare to give Lingshan and the others pointers. Firstly, these people weren't real disciples of the Blue Cloud sect, and secondly, he had to give face to Lin Yi, his master. Not only would they not appreciate it, but they might even look down on him for no reason. But come to think of it, Xianijia was an experienced Golden Core practitioner from the Archaic Alliance. It wasn't surprising that he knew how to deal with the snow, but other people wouldn't know as much, especially people from the common world like Lingshan. She wouldn't know the inside story. The enemy was strong, and she was weak. Retreating as soon as the fight started, waiting for the enemy's momentum to pass before launching a counterattack. From Lingshan's point of view, this was quite a good strategy, but it was a pity that her opponent was Luo Shasheng of the Snow Sword sect. There was a difference in strength between the two in the first place, and now that the snow had formed after 10 moves, the gap between them was even wider. Lingshan didn't have a chance to counterattack at all. She might have had a 10% chance of winning at the start, but now that the fight had dragged on, even that 10% chance of winning was gone. Why don't you just let her surrender, Master? Where there's life, there's hope. Xianijia walked to Lin Yi's side and advised softly. Admitting defeat would only mean losing one round. There were still 4 chances left. As long as he worked hard, he might still have the chance to qualify for the trial. However, if he insisted on dragging it out, it wouldn't just be a matter of losing one round. He might even lose his life. Lin Yi smiled and shook his head. Don't underestimate Lingshan just because she's a weak girl. Her personality has always been strong. Unless she's willing, it's useless even if I say anything. This, Xianijia could only sigh helplessly and did not say anything else. After all, there were so many pairs of eyes staring at him. It was inappropriate for him to say too much under the watchful eyes of the public. Otherwise, he would be accused of favoritism. Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly as he looked at Lin Yi. In a battle between masters of the same level, Xue's force was unstoppable once it was formed. A casual move could easily kill someone, and it wouldn't leave any evidence behind. Just wait to collect this girl's corpse. As they were talking, the situation had changed. Lingshan was still able to barely dodge before, but now that Luo Shasheng was using his snow form, every move he made was unstoppable. She couldn't keep dodging anymore, and dodging wasn't a long-term plan. It was already a miracle that she was able to keep dodging for so long with her strength. Still trying to dodge at this point? You think you can? Luo Shasheng laughed as he used the snow force to force 3 moves, forcing Lingshan into a corner. He couldn't wait to use his trump card, the snow kill stance. He was afraid that if he attacked too late, Lingshan would admit defeat and stop. He wouldn't be able to kill her then. As soon as he used the snow kill stance, a thick layer of invisible snow appeared on the blade, and the snow fell in all directions, covering Lingshan's entire body. Lingshan's movements slowed down by 60% in that instant. She was moving very fast before, but now it was as if she was moving in slow motion. The scene was very strange. The Snow Sword School's snow force is really strong. The Archaic Alliance disciples couldn't help but gasp. Snow force was the signature of the Snow Sword School, but it wasn't easy to form it in a real battle, especially at a lower level like Foundation Establishment. Normal disciples had a hard time grasping the intricacies of snow force, and unless they had an overwhelming advantage, they wouldn't be able to see the power of snow force with their own eyes. Yeah, they all say that snow force accumulates to become something extraordinary, but I didn't expect it to have such a strong restraining effect. No wonder they say that you can't form a snow force, and that you're invincible when you form it. There weren't many martial skills that had a restraining effect. Normally, it would at most slow down a person's speed by 10 to 20%. Restraining a person's speed by more than 30% was already rare. It had to be known that a 30% effect was already very obvious, but this time it was a full 60%. In a situation like this, even a Sky-class full mastery would be able to defeat Lingshan easily, let alone Luo Shixing, who had the upper hand. The moment he used the snow kill stance, his slaughter blade was practically at Lingshan's neck. Lingshan was already a dead person in his eyes. Haha, too bad for such a beautiful girl. I wouldn't do something like this, but now that Shui Jianfeng wants you dead, you have no choice but to die. Luo Shixing sighed to himself. He didn't show any mercy at all, going straight for Lingshan's neck. The people around him paled as they watched. That blade would definitely take Lingshan's head. This Luo Shixing was really ruthless. Master, you're really not going to do anything? Even Xian Ijia, the leader of the team, couldn't help but feel his eyelids twitch. If it weren't for the fact that he had to remain neutral as a judge, even he would have stopped Lin Yi. No need. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Shui Jianfeng, who wasn't far away, frowned as he looked back and forth between Lin Yi and Lingshan. He couldn't help but pinch his chin in puzzlement. Was this guy really not worried about Lingshan's life at all, or was he just putting on an act? Just when Shui Jianfeng was puzzled, the situation on the field suddenly changed. Lingshan, who everyone thought was definitely going to die, suddenly sped up at the last moment, narrowly dodging the fatal blade. So fast. Luo Shixing jumped in fright, and the people around him gasped as well. All of them were stunned by Lingshan's sudden burst of speed. Not good. Luo Shixing fell for it. Shui Jianfeng was, after all, a Golden Core practitioner and the Snow Sword Sect's senior disciple. Chapter 50-184. Lin Yi's lips curled up. Lingshan's acting skills were quite good, fooling everyone in front of everyone. Even Shui Jianfeng, who was a bystander, could barely react, let alone Luo Shixing, who was blinded by the whole situation. He was probably still in a daze right now. From the beginning to the end, this duel was a trap directed by Lin Yi and played by Lingshan. The Snow Sword School's most feared aspect was the Snow Force. Once the Snow Force was formed, it would be hard to block. Even Xian Ijia could easily see this, let alone Lin Yi, who had studied the Snow Sword School's practitioner's arts. Plus, he had Lung Lung beside him. Even if he missed it, Lung Lung would still remind him. After knowing this, the most common strategy was naturally what Xian Ijia had thought, to break the Snow Force, and try his best to avoid the Snow Force. However, from Lin Yi's point of view, such a strategy could only be considered as normal, and it was far from being smart. With the difference in strength between Lingshan and Luo Shixing, how could she win if it was just normal? If Lingshan really went all out to break the Snow Force, she might be able to mess up Luo Shixing's formation and make it hard for him to form the Snow Force, but that would definitely expose a lot of flaws. She was already at a disadvantage in terms of strength, and if she exposed more flaws, then there would be no way for her to fight. So, the strategy Lin Yi taught her this time was to show her weakness and let her opponent form the Snow Force, using this to magnify the underestimation hidden in her opponent's heart. When the opponent couldn't wait to release the Snow Force, it would mean that the opponent had underestimated her to the extreme, and that would be the perfect time to counterattack. Of course, it was far from enough to just rely on numbing her opponent's mentality. Lingshan had to purposely slow down her speed during this process, and that was why it was so difficult to dodge. Everything was just an act. As a result, Lingshan's speed was reduced by 30%, and when Luo Shixing used his Snow Force, it was reduced by another 30%. That was why the slow-motion scene had happened. Luo Shixing had underestimated his opponent and didn't even realize that she was acting. He thought that Lingshan was weak and that she wouldn't even be able to withstand a single blow from his snow aspect. That was why he used his snow aspect, determined to take her life. The snow slaughter form was an extremely dangerous move. It was extremely powerful, but at the same time, it would cause the user to reveal quite a few openings. As a result, unless there was a 90% chance of success, no disciple of the Snow Sword School would recklessly use this move. Even if they did use it, they would definitely be very careful, ready to withdraw and retreat at any time. Unfortunately, Luo Shaoxing thought it was absolutely safe, so he had already thrown all of this to the back of his mind. Lingshan had been waiting for this opening from start to finish, and it had finally come. One retreating, one advancing, Lingshan relied on the sudden burst of speed she'd been hiding, dodging the killer's blade that was coming at her. She even went one step further, closing the distance between her and the man, not giving him a chance to react as she elbowed him in the throat. Luo Shaoxing didn't even have the time to cry out in pain. The crowd was silent as they looked at the motionless Luo Shaoxing on the ground. This turn of events was simply too sudden, and they didn't even have time to react. It wasn't until Xi and Ijia announced Lingshan's victory that the crowd looked at each other, all of them looking at Lingshan in disbelief. She was actually able to turn the tables with one move from her opponent's snow aspect. This woman really wasn't simple. How was it? Did I hit well? Lingshan ran over to Lin Yi's side to take credit. It's SOSO. Lin Yi smiled. Lingshan's sis-in-law is SO, even though she's so strong? Boss, your standards are too high. Chen Tian and the others couldn't help but gasp. It was true that Lingshan wasn't very strong in terms of strength, but the way she controlled the rhythm of the battle was far beyond a normal person's level. It was a classic example of the weak defeating the strong. Is it high? I don't think so. It's not like she's challenging someone of a higher level, it's just fighting someone of the same level. It's something that should be expected, wouldn't it? Wouldn't all that preparation be for nothing? Lin Yi chuckled. Lingshan's execution was indeed strong, but from his point of view, there were quite a few areas where she hadn't handled things perfectly. She was still too inexperienced. Wow, Linny bro, you can't always use your own standards to judge us. Look at those people. Their mouths are wide enough to fit a duck egg. You can see how strong Lingshan's sis was just now. Ziyu said with a frown. At least in the eyes of the outsiders, Lingshan's performance just now was absolutely stunning. Even Xi and Ijia's eyes lit up. Luckily, Lingshan had just broken through and didn't have enough experience. Otherwise, with the strength she displayed just now, she might even be able to challenge someone of a higher level. Lin Yi waved his hand with a smile before turning to Lingshan. That battle was a very valuable experience for you, so don't get too excited yet. Sit down and think about it, reflect on what you did right and what you didn't. That's the only way you'll be able to improve and get stronger the more you fight. Okay, don't worry. Lingshan nodded and went to meditate. While everyone was happy for Lingshan, Xue Jianfeng, on the other hand, was gritting his teeth in anger. As far as he was concerned, Luo Shaoxing dealing with Lingshan should have been a piece of cake. He didn't expect things to turn out this way. He really didn't know what to say. Trash. Xue Jianfeng spat harshly at Luo Shaoxing, who was dragged out of the crowd. Then, he stared at Xi and Ijia, who was hosting the second round. It was a pity that he didn't get to kill Lingshan, but he still had a chance later on. He wasn't disappointed at all. As expected, the second round had Lin Yi's people. This time, it was Ying Ziyu. Xue Jianfeng was overjoyed. This girl looked much weaker than Lingshan, and even the weakest Foundation establishment disciple in the Archaic Alliance would be taken care of easily. With his connections and reputation in the Archaic Alliance, any Foundation establishment disciple wouldn't reject him if he gave them some benefits. Chapter 5185. Ziyu was a little nervous at first, but after realizing that it was Yubing, she was overjoyed. It became an internal sparring now, and it didn't matter who won or lost. In fact, Lin Yi had told them about this a long time ago. After all, they didn't have many people, and once they drew lots, it would be easy for them to fight amongst themselves. Under these circumstances, they had to go through the motions and distribute the wins to the person who needed it the most. Just like right now, Yubing chose to admit defeat after going through the motions. Although he had just reached foundation level as well, in terms of strength, Yubing was undoubtedly much stronger than Ziyu. With Lin Yi's special teaching, Yubing had enough confidence that he could get enough wins from the Archaic Alliance disciples. As long as his luck wasn't too bad, winning 3 out of 4 wasn't hard at all. Ziyu, on the other hand, was different. It wasn't easy for her to win from someone else, especially with Xue Jianfeng watching from the sidelines. It was even harder for her to get into the archaic trials, and so Yubing gave the win to her. Thanks, Yubing bro. Ziyu was all smiles after getting off the stage. She couldn't wait to get one of them, every time. She didn't need many, just 2 more would do. That way, she'd be able to get into the archaic trials. Lin Yi and the others looked at each other and smiled. To be honest, they had the same thought as well. Even after all the preparation they had, they still didn't want Ziyu and the girls to take the risk. It was a pity that things like drawing lots could only be left to the heavens. Otherwise, Xi and Ijia wouldn't be able to answer to the higher-ups if they did something, especially with so many people watching from the sidelines. I object. Xue Jianfeng shouted suddenly. Everyone instantly quietened down, and their gazes converged onto him in unison. They looked at each other and didn't understand what was going on. What are you objecting to? Xi and Ijia frowned. I'm protesting that they're rigging the match. That Yubing was clearly going easy on Ziyu just now, just casually dealing with her and ending the fight. Even an idiot could see that. Are you going to say you can't see it, Uncle Xian? Xue Jianfeng humphed coldly. Everyone turned to look at Xi and Ijia. Xi and Ijia nodded calmly and admitted, that's right. I can see it. Since you can see that they are faking it, you, as the martial uncle leading the team and the referee, actually don't care about it. Instead, you allow it. Martial Uncle Xian, aren't you being too biased by doing this? Are you looking down on our ancient alliance's rules too much? Xue Jianfeng took advantage of the situation and said overbearingly. However, Xi and Ijia didn't panic at all. Instead, he looked at him with a faint smile and said, Please forgive me for being ignorant. Why don't you tell me, Xue Jianfeng? Which rule in the archaic alliance states that one can't show mercy during a competition? This, Xue Jianfeng originally thought he had something on his opponent, but he was left speechless. If they were fighting against friends or family, then it was only natural for them to be lenient. The archaic alliance truly didn't have such a rule. This old man has always treated everyone equally. If you show mercy to others, or if you ask others to show mercy to you, then you'll have to pay the price. I won't stop it either. Any other questions? Xi and Ijia said faintly. Xue Jianfeng humphed coldly, speechless. He looked at Lin Yi's group hatefully, waiting for the lot drawing to begin. Lin Yi's group didn't participate in the next 2 matches, but in the 5th match, it was finally Wu Qintian's turn. His opponent was Feng Pingxiu of the Righteous Sect. Xue Jianfeng wasn't familiar with Feng Pingxiu, but the Righteous Sect was also a small sect in the Zhongdao Alliance. They had a good relationship with the Snowsword sect, so Xue Jianfeng's words had some influence. Feng Pingxiu agreed to Xue Jianfeng's request without hesitation. However, what shocked everyone was that Feng Pingxiu, who was supposed to have the upper hand in terms of strength, was beaten up by Qintian's series of quick attacks. From start to finish, he didn't even have a chance to fight back and was forcefully taken down by Qintian's series of attacks. This guy's so strong. Everyone was speechless. From the looks of it, they thought that Qintian was much stronger than Feng Pingxiu, but they didn't know that it was all thanks to Lin Yi's teachings. The Righteous Sect's arts and techniques were all about advancing step by step, and this style was very stable. As long as one had the upper hand in terms of strength, they wouldn't be defeated under normal circumstances. But in Lin Yi's eyes, there was a huge drawback. It was too slow. Because of this, it was hard for the Righteous Sect disciples to use their full strength at the start, especially the first 3 moves. They could only use 70% of their strength, and under such circumstances, they wouldn't have much of an advantage. After all, if they could finish off their opponent in 3 moves, it wouldn't be a fight between the same level anymore. But Qintian wasn't a normal opponent. He had the counter techniques that Lin Yi had taught him, and it was just right for him to take down Feng Pingxiu. It was like a father beating his son. After the first 3 moves, Feng Pingxiu was already showing signs of losing, and in his panic, he couldn't use his strength. It wasn't strange at all for him to be taken down by Qintian. Trash. Trash. Shui Jianfeng gritted his teeth once more. Luo Shasheng might have been defeated by Ling Shan at the last moment, but at least it gave him hope. This Feng Pingxiu, on the other hand, was just a useless piece of trash. Fortunately, there was still a chance. That was the only thing Shui Jianfeng could do to comfort himself. But what hurt him the most was that Lin Yi's group either went up against their own people, or they got the last laugh like Ling Shan and Wu Qintian. All the disciples of the ancient sects lost to them one by one, and a few of them were even turned around by Lin Yi, as if they had the help of the gods. It was like seeing a ghost in the flesh. Of course, Lin Yi's group didn't win completely. Fatty Lai and Kong Xiaobo lost, but these two were very cunning. The moment they saw that the counter techniques Lin Yi taught them didn't work on their opponents, they didn't even bother fighting and just surrendered, not giving anyone a chance to do anything to them. When everyone was done fighting, Shui Jianfeng was so depressed that he wanted to spit out blood. He wanted to go up himself, but he was a foundation building perfected in name. Unless the people dared to challenge him, they wouldn't have the chance to do so. Chapter 50, 186. Shui Jianfeng couldn't help but feel a headache. This isn't right. I don't know what Lin Yi's group is up to, but they're all acting like they've taken the wrong medicine. Normal people really can't handle them. What should I do? He couldn't help but feel a headache. He'd promised the glasses doctor that he would be able to handle this. What if he messed things up and the glasses doctor canceled his priority training right away? Just when Shui Jianfeng was at his wit's end, another disciple of the Snow Sword School went up. Just like Luo Shasheng, he was forced into a snow form and his opponent couldn't fight back at all. He was easily defeated in one move. This was the most normal result. If everyone was like Ling Shan, turning defeat into victory in one move, then it would be a problem. At the thought, Shui Jianfeng had a flash of inspiration. He looked at Lin Yi and Cold, who were chatting and laughing not far away. He understood immediately. The competition continued. After the early phase of Foundation was the battle between Sky Class Full Mastery. If one wasn't even at Sky Class Full Mastery, then they wouldn't have the right to participate in the competition. It would be a waste of time. There were only 2 short months left. If one was still at Sky Class Late Phase Peak or even lower, then there was no way they could succeed in the next 2 months. They were destined to be eliminated, and naturally, there was no need for them to participate in this competition. When the first round was over, it was already the second evening. Everyone went back to rest for the night, and after the third day, the second round of the competition would begin. According to the usual practice, the first round was to challenge someone of a higher level. The others had been watching the first round, and only Ling Tianyu had stepped up to challenge Lin Yi. He'd tasted defeat for the first time in his life. Now, in the second round, after 2 days of deliberation, and with the fact that the first round had shown everyone's strength, it was enough for everyone to use as a reference. Sure enough, there were a lot more people who chose to challenge those who were of a higher level than them. In total, there were as many as 7 people. Among them, the most eye-catching was Ling Tianyu. Although this young master of the Thousand Blades sect had been defeated by Lin Yi last time, there was no doubt about his strength. Apart from Lin Yi, no one else was a match for him. Facts had proven that even if Ling Tianyu was not the most invincible person in the Foundation establishment stage, he was definitely one of the best. The expert in the great circle of the Foundation establishment stage that he was fighting against was not weak, but he was easily killed in a single move without being able to fight back. Just like that, Ling Tianyu became the first disciple to qualify for the primeval trials, while the disciple in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm whom he defeated became the first unlucky guy to be eliminated. Looking at that person's dazed look, many people felt sad for a moment. A dignified disciple in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm was eliminated just like that. It really made people sigh and speechless. In terms of strength, this person was not weak among the experts in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm. If he had not encountered Ling Tianyu, he actually had a great chance to win 3 rounds against other experts of the same level. Of course, the premise was that his luck was not too bad. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. His luck was not just bad, it was simply bad luck. Under such cruel rules, it was impossible for him not to be eliminated. Even if he wanted to blame someone, he could only blame himself for being targeted by Ling Tianyu. Brother Tianyu, as far as I know, you're not someone who easily admits defeat. Why didn't you continue to challenge Lin Yi today, but chose such a soft persimmon instead? Xue Jianfeng suddenly came over and asked with a strange and sarcastic smile on his face. As soon as his words came out, everyone around looked over. Even Exian Ijie couldn't help but listen attentively out of curiosity. For this reason, he even deliberately postponed the next cross-level battle. Ling Tianyu glanced around the crowd, and when his eyes swept past Lin Yi, he nodded slightly without any embarrassment. Then he said lightly, "Brother Xue, you are wrong. Tianyu respects every opponent. In Tianyu's eyes, Brother Zhan is a real opponent, not a soft persimmon." This Brother Zhan was Zhan Shixiang, the disciple in the Great Circle of Foundation Establishment Realm whom he had just defeated with one move. Although Ling Tianyu's expression was very sincere, everyone felt that it was just a formality. Zhan Shixiang was a strong opponent for others, but for a genius like Ling Tianyu, it was not an exaggeration to say that Zhan Shixiang was a soft persimmon. Even Zhan Shixiang himself thought so. Sure enough, he was a hypocrite. Xue Jianfeng cursed in his heart, but remained calm on the surface. He said with a faint smile, "Brother Tianyu seems to have not answered my question? Because I am no match for Brother Lin. It's as simple as that." Ling Tianyu didn't hide his answer at all. The outcome of the battle the day before yesterday had already been decided. At least for now, he wasn't Lin Yi's opponent. Even if he had the pride of being the young master of the Thousand Blade sect, he wouldn't lie to himself about this kind of thing. Really? Then why don't you challenge me? I have been waiting for you for a long time. Xue Jianfeng's words surprised everyone. Everyone immediately looked at each other. Chapter 50, 187. This was the cruelty of challenging someone of a higher level. It was extremely difficult and dangerous. With Zhan Shixiang as an example, everyone who was challenged would definitely go all out. Whenever there was a chance, they would strike ruthlessly to establish their might, killing the chicken to warn the monkey. Only in this way could others fear them and stay far away, no longer daring to challenge them of a higher level. When the 7 cross-level duels were over, Exian Ijie was about to announce the start of the second round of regular duels. At this moment, Xue Jianfeng stood up and said loudly, "I'm sorry, Junior Uncle Exian. There's something that I have to tell everyone. Otherwise, some people will play us in the palm of their hands with dirty and despicable means. They think that no one knows about it." "What are you trying to say?" Exian Ijie humphed coldly, trying his best to control his temper. His impression of Xue Jianfeng was extremely bad. If it wasn't for everyone's eyes, he wouldn't be so polite. "What I'm trying to say is that our Snow Sword School sent out a traitor, and because of this traitor, our Snow Sword School's disciples lost a battle that they shouldn't have lost." Xue Jianfeng pointed at one person. It was Lung Lung. Lung Lung suddenly became the center of attention. She didn't know what to do. Fortunately, Lin Yi was standing next to her. One look from him calmed her down, and she retorted, "First, I'm not a traitor. The Snow Sword School never announced that I'm a traitor. Second, I don't know what you're talking about. What does the Snow Sword School's disciple losing the battle have to do with me?" Xue Jianfeng laughed coldly and pointed at Luo Shaxing. "All right, then why don't you tell everyone, with Luo Shaxing's strength, how could he be defeated by Lingshan in one move when he had already formed a snow form?" Of course it's because Lingshan had a better grasp of the rhythm and Luo Shaxing underestimated his opponent. "What's so strange about losing the battle?" Lung Lung said disapprovingly. "That's right, everyone can see that. It's a perfect example of the weak defeating the strong. There's nothing to doubt," Exian Ijie added. "I don't think so. Lingshan's grasp of the rhythm was ingenious, and Luo Shaxing did underestimate his opponent. But if it's just based on these 2 points, she would at most be able to find a flaw in his counterattack. Why don't you guys put yourselves in her shoes and think about it? If you guys had the opportunity to counterattack, would you be able to turn defeat into victory in one move? Xue Jianfeng asked. Everyone paused for a moment, shaking their heads in unison. Luo Shaoxing had used his snow force, and that powerful restriction effect was real. Even if he revealed an opening, it would still be extremely hard to defeat him in one move. After all, Lingshan was just a newbie in the common world who'd just reached foundation level. Xian Yijie frowned. Although he didn't want to agree, what Xue Jianfeng said did make some sense. Recalling the scene of Lingshan turning the tables, even he felt that it was a little unbelievable. So, I think it's necessary to ask again. Why was Lingshan able to defeat Luo Shaoxing in one move under that situation? Xue Jianfeng didn't need Lung Lung's answer, because he had his own. He pointed at Lung Lung and said, "There's only one reason. We, Xue Jian, sent out a traitor. A traitor who revealed our sex arts to the enemy." Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Xue Jianfeng was really shameless. He had already become a lackey of the center, but he could still say that Lung Lung was a traitor in public. What a weirdo. "What proof do you have?" Xian Yijie said in a low voice. At this point, he had to continue the conversation. Otherwise, it would be his dereliction of duty as the leader of the team. However, it was impossible for him to follow Xue Jianfeng's wishes. Unless Xue Jianfeng could present solid evidence, otherwise, it would just be a groundless speculation. Lingshan's attack that turned the tables just so happened to hit the life gate of snow murder form. Because of that, she was able to kill Luo Shaoxing in one move. It can't be a coincidence, can it? Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly. Every sect had different mental cultivation methods, and the way to circulate their zhenqi was also different. Every move and every style had a completely different emphasis, so the vital point of every move was very different. For example, when using the snow-killing style, when using this move, the throat was the most crucial point of the vital point of the zhenqi circulation. As long as the throat was hit, even if the opponent was weak, it would be easy to defeat the opponent in one move. Xian Yijie could only look at Lin Yi, hoping that Lin Yi could stand out and refute it himself. After all, what Xue Jianfeng said did make sense. It would be too far-fetched to say that Lingshan's last move that went straight for Luo Shaoxing's throat was a coincidence. You have nothing to say now, right? If it wasn't for Lung Lung, if it wasn't for the traitor, if it wasn't for her revealing our sex arts and the life gate of Snow Sword School, how could Lingshan win against Luo Shaoxing with her insignificant strength? So now, the evidence is irrefutable. Lung Lung is the traitor, and Lingshan relied on her to turn the tables. Xue Jianfeng struck the iron while it was hot and made the final decision. This time, everyone's gazes towards Lung Lung and Lingshan turned unfriendly. Although this matter didn't seem to have anything to do with them, it affected the fairness of the competition. If Xian Yijie still wanted to cover up for them, he'd be the target of everyone's wrath. Hold on. Lingshan's technique is indeed a perfect counter to your Snow Sword School. However, aren't you being a little too unscrupulous if you're trying to blame Lung Lung with just a few one-sided and arbitrary words? Or is it that Xue Jianfeng, your IQ is so low that you can't think of any other possibilities? Lin Yi smiled calmly. What did you say? Xue Jianfeng froze and raged. The evidence is irrefutable, and you're still trying to deny it. You still have the cheek to say that the evidence is irrefutable? Lin Yi snorted and said calmly, if that's the case, then I'd like to ask for your advice. Yesterday, during the early phase of foundation building, it wasn't just your Snow Sword School that was countered. The other righteous sects and whatnot were also countered by us. How are you going to explain this? You're not going to say that all the primeval sects have traitors and revealed their arts to us beforehand, are you? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.